going to get started, folks, here. Good to the January 11th Governance and Priorities Committee meeting. I'd like to first recognize that we're in the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Siatala Tak Snuneymuxw Mastimok Ni Nakakwasas Tatamak Atanakwayal. We'd like to give our highest appreciation to the people of Snuneymuxw for having us on their traditional territory today. Our clerk today is Ms. Sheila Gurry. Today's Governance Priorities Committee meeting will be held in accordance with the Community Charter Council Procedure Bylaw 2018 number 7272 and Ministerial Order number M192 governing open meetings during a state of emergency and Provincial Health Officer Order regarding mass gatherings and events. Therefore, members of the public are required to observe meetings virtually and not attend in person, and question period will be suspended throughout the duration of the Provincial Health Order in effect. At this point, I would like to give the floor to His Worship, Mayor Crow.
Thank you very much, Chair Bonner. I appreciate this is the first meeting of any members of council in the new year, and I will say more at the meeting on Monday, January the 18th. But as many in the community will know, Marianne Turley, one of this community's leading citizens, died on Thursday night last week, and I simply couldn't let us start this meeting without recognizing that death. She was a successful businesswoman, an advocate for downtown, a leader in the arts and culture community, a fine wife and mother, and of course, spouse to our dear friend, Councillor Jim Turley. I will say more at another time, but on behalf of council and the city and all of us who knew her well, I want to extend condolences to Jim and his family at this time. This is not the way anyone wants to start a new year, but it is what it is, as one of my friends said, recognizing that Marianne has fought a long and valiant battle with cancer and ended her life with dignity and courage. Thank you.
Thank you, Worship. At this point, our next item is introduction of late items.
There are no late items, Chair.
Thank you. And I need a motion for adoption of the agenda as presented. So I have a motion by Cheryl Armstrong, seconded by Cindy Martin. All those in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, that's passed. Thank you very much. Item number 4 is motion for adoption of minutes as circulated. Motion by Councillor Armstrong, seconded by Councillor Martman. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, raise your hands. Any opposed? Hearing, seeing none, that is passed. And to the meat of our meeting, reports. Number 5, our first item on the agenda is 5D, number 1, to be introduced by Mr. Rudolph.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Happy New Year to Mayor and Council and those that are watching today. This is our first meeting of the new year, and it's actually a great opportunity to start the year with a very positive and thought-provoking presentation from our two of our esteemed colleagues, I guess, in the community. One is Joan Brown, who's the CAO of the Snuneymuxw First Nation, and the second is our superintendent of the School District 68, Scott Saywell. Both of which have been doing presentations on the nature of their organization's relationship, and not only the school district and First Nation, but on the subject matter of reconciliation, truth and reconciliation. They have offered to provide some thoughts today as a door opener for our own city council on the subject of truth and reconciliation, and perhaps provide some learnings from the relationship that has evolved over the past several years, not only between Scott and Joan, but between the Snuneymuxw First Nation and the school district. But based on a couple of these types of meetings that we've had with the senior management team here at the city, I think we will all come away from the conversation today with things to think about. And really, it's quite an honor actually to have the opportunity to introduce Joan and Scott and turn it over to them for a conversation on things that should be of quite a significant interest to our own City Council. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. Antapak Okomowit, Tanita Nanemo. First of all, I want to really thank and appreciate the recognition of the Nanemo territory. We're really very humbled about the opportunity to speak in these challenging and difficult times. So I realize everyone's so busy, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to have a conversation with you today. What we're hoping to do is, in the best way we can in the short time possible, is to provide you an understanding of the teachings of these great lands. We hope that it'll take you on a journey that will help us all build a strong foundation built on the ancestral teachings of these lands. Right, Taska? Scott?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. Do we have a PowerPoint that we were going to put on? Can someone put that on? Oh, thank you. Go to, so someone's going to move to the next slide. Can I just say next slide? And one more. You going to speak to this, Joan?
Yes, yeah, I'll start. And so, in addition to the acknowledgement, we want to first say that, honoring the lands and in a good way is really bringing ourselves in the presence of sacred. It's like taking a deep breath and helping us focus, because we realize we're all so busy that it's important to take that pause and just to help us to be in the presence of the sacred. What we're going to speak to today is where we're going and trying in our effort to take a more holistic understanding, recognizing that the connection to family, land, and community are the foundation to wellness. So today we're going to talk about where we're going and what we've learned along the way, especially around the attachment to place and what it means in terms of partnership, a real significant partnership around the shared vision, shared activity, shared resources, and really focusing our efforts in terms of the ancestral knowledge. Mr. Scott?
Next slide, please.
So we want to talk about what we've learned along the way. And here I have a picture with myself and my mother. My mother was a survivor of residential school. She never talked about it, but what she did teach me by her way of being, as a stroke patient, she never felt sorry for herself, and at her weakest moments, she was always reminding us just to appreciate one more day on Mother Earth. It was just a profound teaching that she's left me, and that's above all, she taught me how to love. Like an ancestral lens is you love with all your heart and all your strength, and that was one of the gifts that she's given us. And the other thing that in terms of Scott and I, that you can see that my life was Indian hospital, Indian day school. If you look at Scott, that despite our differences, we found a common ground, and that's a love for the people and a love for the land, and that's really guiding us and really strengthening our relationship to find a common path for the two organizations to work together in a good way.
Thanks, Joan. Siem so quen, CM Esquela, and Scott Sewell, Nita Innington at Duncan, BC, Easton, Mana'uk, Robert Saywell, Geraldine Mann, Edmonton, Alberta, Except Quanasavaki, Atanaquail, Titsal, Tusmanemo, Mustimo, Mihawk, Wishipkatamak, Atanaquail, Isap, Awasiem. All my respected friends and relatives, respected elders, leaders, chiefs, dignitaries, good day. My name is Scott Saywell, and I was born in Duncan, BC. I'm the child of Robert Saywell and Geraldine Mann from Edmonton, Alberta. Through them, my people come from Great Britain, largely England and Scotland. Thank you all for gathering here today, and I'll start by giving my highest gratitude and appreciation to the people of Nanaimo. And thank you, respected ones. Thank you, Joan, for starting us off in a good way. And thanks to the City of Nanaimo for recognizing territory. I wanted to begin just ever so briefly to share what I've learned about starting such a meeting. And you've done a nice job as visitors to this land who are learning and understanding Indigenous protocol. A few simple things that you can remember first, and well done, acknowledge the land. And when giving that version of a land acknowledgement, the most important thing is that it comes from the heart and it's out of respect, and you humble yourself to the land. Nanaimo Ladysmith Public Schools territorial acknowledgement, as we showed on the second slide there, just briefly, and you can look later, was gifted to us by Joan Brown, and so that's very special to us. Second, acknowledge the ancestors, and finally, as I did, acknowledge yourself. Introduction should include where you're from, which means your family's cultural, geographical background prior to being a settler in Canada, for example, your heritage, and where your family is Indigenous to. As I did, you might include where your parents or grandparents are from as well. I love this slide because, as Joan said, it sort of shows two different worlds. And what I do believe unites us is a love for this land right here and the people. Next slide, thanks. And as you can see there, I almost grew into my ears. I mention all of that because I think we all have an interest in where we're from. And even if you've never been to that place, I've never been to England, it kind of has a place in my heart. And so, and many of us are on, we go to websites, Ancestry.com or other websites that connect us to our ancestors and help us understand who we are. And many of us, I haven't, but have even taken, the DNA test to prove who you are, provide information about why you're here. Places play an important role in developing and maintaining self-identity and group identity. We know this. So, as I've done with Jake and the team, let's do this short exercise, which is to, in about 10 seconds or so, we'll give you just chart your lineage. Look at the map, look at where you were born, identify where your parents are born on the map, and grandparents, and so on, perhaps as many generations as you could go. I've done this exercise a number of times with small groups of people, and the next step is usually I'll have people tell me where they're from and share a little bit of their lineage. Suffice to say, lots of us, myself included, have a difficult time identifying my lineage past a few generations. But always, when I ask a small group of people to do this, there is an emotional reaction when they start to talk about who they are and where they're from. Of course, because we know attachment to a place is a human basic need. Next slide, please. So I'm going to read from a quote here. I really like this quote. Home is not simply a mark upon a map any more than a river's just water. It is the place at the center of the compass from which every arrow radiates and where the heart is fixed. It is a force that forever draws us back or lures us on. For where the home is, there lies hope, and future waits, and everything is possible. I love that quote, and here's the thing. When I ask Joan Brown or anyone else from Nanaimo where they're from, they say right here. They point to this spot on the map, generation after generation, for 10,000 years, since time immemorial. Imagine a language and a culture and a people who were developed here. It's in their DNA, it's part of who they are. Next slide, please. So, we're all on this journey of reconciliation. And so, I wanted to talk a little bit about, the school district's journey to our strategic plan and our goal of truth and reconciliation. The TRC defines reconciliation, says it is about establishing and maintaining a mutually respectful relationship between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal peoples in this country. In order for that to happen, there has to be awareness of the past and acknowledgement of the harm that has been inflicted, atonement for the causes, and actions to change behavior. Growing up in central Vancouver Island, the narrative I was told about Indigenous people, both in school and in the larger community, was one that was negative, damaging, and of course false. As superintendent, I have a responsibility to ensure that the next generation of children are told the truth about Canada's ugly history of Indigenous people, a history that, as you know, includes the development of Indian residential schools, the 60s scoop, other related policies and procedures intended to appropriate Indigenous land and eliminate Indigenous people as a culturally distinct society, the equivalent of cultural genocide. So my intention today is not to provide a history lesson concerning the atrocities in all of these areas, particularly in Indian residential schools, but suffice to say that 150,000 students attended residential schools over the better part of 150 years, and education, systems of education, were used as tools of destruction, right? The stated purpose was to kill the Indian within the child. So to me, this term reconciliation, it's malleable. It means different things to different people. It's a mutable concept. So Joan doesn't like to speak about this. She says she doesn't like this slide. I force her. I say I have to talk about this a little bit because Joan would say we all lost something. We all lost something. But in truth and reconciliation, of course, the truth comes first. And Joan would also say that although we had a bad start, there is hope. So I believe Canada, BC, Nanaimo has moved to a point which we no longer ask whether reconciliation is possible, but how is reconciliation possible. And from that point, I think increasingly, non-Indigenous Canadians are asking, what can I do? We're all asking, what's my role in this? And so quickly, here's our journey. On April 26th, Nanaimo Ladysmith Public Schools added reconciliation to our strategic plan. It was Natasha Baugh, who was from Nanawa First Nation, who was a school trustee at the time. I remember that particular meeting well. She instigated this conversation. It was well received, and I remember the board sort of getting all over this idea, right behind it. We'll never get rid of this as a broad goal, truth and reconciliation, because mending the relationship with our Indigenous brothers and sisters is not a quick deal, right? It took us a long time to get here, and it's going to take us a long time to move on, and in partnership. So, as you do, our first step was to invite our Indigenous partners to the table, right? Nothing about us without us, Nothing about us without us is a slogan used to communicate that very idea, that no policy should be decided by any representative without the full and direct participation of those member groups affected by that policy. So we invited our knowledge keepers from Snuneymuxw, Snanawa, Staminas, Mid-Island Métis, and Tilikum Laylam Aboriginal Center. And that started our journey on reconciliation. So the end of that journey, next slide please, in October, the end of that journey, well, a piece of it, in October 2018, we presented the CISS policy framework to the board as an overarching foundational principle that will guide the district throughout the life of the plan, irrespective of changes to the plan's goals and objectives. CISS framework.
Thank you, Scott. And it's really difficult in a sense, to think about, where we're coming, where we are today. We're so grateful and appreciative for the school district to invite us to the table to have some real meaningful dialogue. There's been several of our ancestors have come to the door several times, but this is the first time we've really been able to walk through the door and really help us understand what the teachings of these lands are and how we can apply them to the work that we're doing on a daily basis. What we learned along the way, of course, is that right out of the gate, that notion of relationality was really critical. Understanding that we're all one family and that we all have a voice and a place in these great lands, and that if we work together, things are really going to change, and we're going to strengthen the outcome with everything that we do, with every breath and every step. But what we realized that, we couldn't really begin to move in a good way until we really understood the vital connections between land, language, and culture. That's the foundational work. The ancestors before us, like my parents' generation, they were the last of the fluent speakers. So for us, we think about it in this way, that it takes all of us to try and interpret it, and especially in a way that we can express it, articulate it in a way that the young people will begin to understand. Because of that gap, we've lost so much along the way, and recognizing it's going to take all of us to turn our attention to the land. And what is stemming from the land is the language and the culture, a way of being. Without a doubt, the land is the cornerstone of our connectivity and our wellness. Language, when the land speaks, it speaks Halkabinam, and a culture is built on ceremony, rituals, and prayers, and processes that are intended to enhance our relationship. It's taken us a couple of years to get here, but the healing along the way and just that deeper understanding has really brought us to a place where we're family. We don't call ourselves a committee, but we call ourselves a family. That's a result of the way of working together. And really, at the end of the day, is that restoring these vital collections, these connections, is a path to building resiliency, enhancing our relationship to our land. It's our strengthening our future. It's just amazing to find a partner that really is embracing that and walking in a good way. Because from an ancestral lens, the term Seetsis means two friends walking together. And from their perspective, when things are moving, it's a very sacred time. It doesn't happen that often, but that's the beauty of working with a partner who's embracing it. So at the end of the day, it's hopefully going to improve the overall health of our community, and above all, allowing Mother Earth to finally heal. Hey, Jessica.
Next slide, please. So, the work that we've done with our strategic plan and the CISS framework, that's all been intentional work. We didn't know where we were, headed. There's been many unintentional consequences of that work, and here are three of them. The city of Nanaimo knows about all three of these, and of course are involved in varying degrees in each one. Our Tate Tuxton project, Hulkamina name for Mount Benson, is a very special project, I know, to the city, to Nanaimo, to Nanaimo Ladysmith Public Schools and BC Housing. And the partner's vision there is to create this idea of a relationship-based community and a village grounded in ancestral knowledge. That's our stated goal. That's what we want to do. Jim, you want to talk a little bit about that as well?
Yes, please. I think for us what is profound in my mind is that we finally found a place where we can look at a whole system, because from our perspective, it's going to take a whole system approach to turn the tides on colonialism. And like Scott said, it was unexpected, and it's really showing itself that with the, from birth to, university, whatever it is, that we have an opportunity in language and culture in a way that people are going to provide that deeper understanding the interconnection between the regions, helping us to understand that each area has its own gift, sense of healing. But, it's really, think about it, that when we work in this way, we have to prepare ourselves for the extraordinary to happen, because, it's just without a doubt, you look at it, I love this slide, because you think about Quesnel School, that's where I went, and it's up to grade 7, and you think about QQS, and just to honor the teaching, so it's moving in a good way, but that whole system approach is profound, and again, it's through the partnership that we're beginning to see this in a different way.
The second one there, Quam Stiwikwal, it's the first public school on reserve. You won't find this in any other community. A co-governance partnership between the Nanaimo Ladysmith Public Schools and Nanaimo First Nation. We're operating in our second year and home to about 110 on and off reserve students from kindergarten to grade 7. We're going to be adding daycare and before and after school care hopefully next September. That's our timeline. Joan, did you want to say anything about this one as well?
Not only that, the Quam, I think, and, for us, it's like, it's about again, the whole system approach, but it's really taking it to a place where our kids are really benefiting from a partnership. And really, when they see us walking together this way, they really see them part of a system as opposed to always on the outside looking in. It's had a profound effect on our students that are there, to the point that when they're in that school, they never want to leave, and they're knocking on my door, say, Grandma, when are we going to get a high school? It's just had a profound effect on our community, thanks to the partnership with school districts.
And the third one is relatively new, and again, we've been talking with city staff, and the mayor came to a meeting as well. And what we're looking to do on Franklin Street again is cultural and recreational programming. Our partners down there, Silicon Leyland, Quamat Leyland, SFN again, and we're inviting the city of Nanaimo to that table as well. And we do sincerely appreciate the city's support for this project, and you've shown that in a variety of ways. And we'll be demolishing those two buildings fairly soon, the Franklin Street Gym and, of course, the what was the Curriculum Resource Center years ago. Joan, anything on that slide?
I think that what I just want to kind of underscore is that, when we're back in a place of one of these ancient village sites, which Franklin Street is, and this Quam, it has a profound effect in terms of the community growing and healing, and we're hoping that others will be able to benefit from that experience as well. It's profound once you realize and acknowledge that ancient village site. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Joan. Next slide, please. Oh, yes. Well, I wanted to just say a little bit about our role and what we can do. And these are simple starters for people. We're all in, different places in our understanding of Indigenous history and culture and the plight of our Indigenous brothers and sisters. So you can start by, this is really starting at the beginning, but learn the name of the territory in which you live. And then when you go to a new place, do the same thing. Learn whose land you are visiting. This is kind of a big one. Learn how First Peoples where you live prefer to be identified. It can be confusing. Lots of, Native, Aboriginal, Indigenous, Indian. That one sort of is a little bit like acid to my tongue because of obviously where that word originated. But the best thing to do is go with whatever people are calling themselves, right? If someone uses First Nation, as in Nanaimo First Nation, then go with that. Some communities are bands, Burns Lake Band. Others are nations, the Squamish Nation. Some actually use Indian, Osoyoos, Indian Band. Again, that's kind of, that's cringy to me, but it's not our comfort level. It's showing respect and using the terms that those individuals and organizations have chosen for themselves. Read Indigenous authors. The two that I always suggest that have influenced me greatly are Thomas King and Paulette Reagan. They always come to mind. There are lots of others, of course. And then share what you've learned. Have a conversation with your family at the dinner table about the history and reconciliation and the kind of Canada that you want to live in. But here's the thing, as with most things, you need to be intentional about your learning. So change is hard. If you've ever had a New Year's resolution, you'll know this. And creating effective social justice habits, particularly when we're dealing with issues around power and privilege and supremacy, leadership, is like a lifestyle change. So setting our intentions and adjusting how we spend our time doing this essential work is critical, and so be intentional. Sometimes the hardest part is getting started, but if you've had a New Year's resolution that has stayed, then you know that getting started was the hardest part. Thank you. Next slide, please.
So for us, it's our vision that as we walk together, that we're going to find a way to help Mother Earth heal, but plan to reconnect with the land, plan to honor the individual and their relationship and community, because without land and the community, we don't have an opportunity to restore a different path. And I think that, with the way that the social issues are in our respective communities, that if we don't work together, we're just not going to survive. But for us, it's really about planning to reconnect to the land, planning to restore the indigenous plant to the land. That's really important. It's our dream that of all those who come to visit these great lands will see and feel and hear the difference, what the land is restored to its natural state. And we're hoping that people are going to move from a sense of entitlement to a sense of responsibility. That's the way of the ancestors that, they were so selfless in what they did, and just understanding that the land is sacred and how do we develop a positive relationship with it, and just to honor the land before we think about ourselves is really, it's been our success and our partnership, and really trying to promote that in a really good way. So thank you. Rachel.
Next slide, please. And with that, I will also say thank you, Heichka, and Joan and I are here. If you have a question or a comment, thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. It's very well received. I would ask if anybody has any comments they'd like to make or questions.
Please stop the share.
Cheryl, you're brightening up there.
Yeah, I was gonna try and raise my hand.
Go.
I just wanted to ask, Joan and Scott, how do you see the city's role in moving forward on this?
Thank you, Cheryl. I'm hoping that, one of the important part of this exercise is inviting the city to the table. And in fact, we had a conversation about the Sultan Latem, that really this is a place is to change the mindset and for us to really build a partnership where we're actually working on something together and focusing our efforts, as I said many times, on the ancestral teachings. But it's really one, Scott and I are there at the table. We're hoping that somebody from the city can join us and really start to think about how can we do this in a good way. So, and each other organization that we invite to focus on the land. That's how we see it. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you.
Anybody have anything else they'd like to add? I can see everybody's hands if they want to raise their hands. Okay, Ben and then Zinni.
Just heartfelt gratitude to you, Joan and Scott, for the presentation. And reconciliation is extremely important for us here in Nanaimo. So yeah, feeling our relationship with each other and also I think with the land. So thank you for taking initiative and working with us on that journey, and I look forward to more building a stronger relationship.
Go ahead, Zinni.
Thank you, and I just want to echo Council Gaspard's thanks, and just really, really grateful about this conversation and being able to learn. It's a small item, but I struggle with pronouncing phonetically words, and I'm wondering what kind of support or assistance can be done in teaching. How do we learn how to pronounce the words?
Can I jump in, Joan?
Yes, please, Scott.
Yeah, it's, we have language lessons, the Hulkamian language lessons every Monday afternoon, and Joan will tell, I won't speak for Joan, but Joan will tell you that it's different muscles, and building up those muscles is important for speaking the Hulkamian language. I'm awful, and sometimes you have to put your tongue to the roof of your mouth and let the air come out the sides. And we were going Monday. I think I'm not sure if we're going this afternoon, but we're going to quit for a little while and then regroup. We're not sure Monday is the best day, and you're all invited to our language lessons when we start them up again. And we have different people come in. We have George Seymour from Seminas First Nations right now doing some work with us. But it's a problem.
I would love that opportunity.
Yeah, well, I will share when we start them up again. We're gonna take a little bit of a break and perhaps change our day. I know Monday isn't great for people on the Zoom meeting.
Thank you.
Your worship.
Thank you, Chair Bonner. Question really more to Scott than to Joan. I appreciate that most events, community activities now are commenced with an acknowledgement of the land and the Snuneymuxw people, but I'm not, my expectations of teaching the whole community about the long history of what has happened since contact is going to be as successful as it is teaching the younger folks. So what I'm interested in knowing in a practical way, what are they learning and when are they learning it in our school system in this community? Not about the whole history, but about literally the history of the Snuneymuxw people and the contact that has occurred here and how colonialism has impacted Nanaimo. I mean, is there a specific class or program or teaching or teachers brought in? Because those are the young minds that will absorb and understand and develop the kind of sympathy that I think will really make reconciliation work. I'm not so convinced that, you know, a 75-year-old racist is going to pick up and carry the flag of reconciliation, but a classroom full of grade 3 kids might.
Yeah, thank you. Really great question. It reminds me of a great little song by Joe Jackson called "I'm the Man," which there's a line in there that says, "If I can't get through to you, I'll get through to your son." The updated version is, you know, "I'll get through to your son or daughter." And that's, you know, that's what we do, of course. Now, BC's new curriculum is very progressive in that they're not, you know, suggesting, you know, one course that everyone has to take. The idea is that First Nations education around the culture and history and flight is woven throughout. Easy to say, difficult to do, and our folks in the Learning Services Department are pretty good at ensuring it happens. Individual schools, like ND as an example, are going to require that grade 10 First Peoples, which is an alternate course to English, is mandatory. So there's a variety of ways we do it. We're limited with language teachers, although we have more than any other district in the province. So, but still difficult to do, say, you know, like a Hulkaminam immersion school. Kwam Stuikwo, we would say, is immersed in Hulkaminam, but not true Hulkaminam immersion, and that's another one of our goals. So, I appreciate that. You know, trying to educate a community is difficult and not maybe not possible in a lot of ways. So we're getting through to the kids.
Go ahead, Councillor Brown.
Chair. Thank you, Chair Bonner. And can you?
You're still muted, sir. There you go.
Okay. Thank you, Chair Bonner, and really thanks to Joan Brown and Scott Sable. Thank you for presenting and doing the work that you're doing. One question, you talked a lot about land and also the importance of names and learning the language. You know, that's definitely talked about or mentioned at length through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's final report. You know, the city within its jurisdiction has parks, roads, names, and all sorts of things. And I'm just curious if there's an opportunity there to start to realize some of the more First Nations names and Siksika names through our city. You know, I think there's some great work happening in the arts and the culture, and I know the Nanaimo Art Gallery. But actually, in sort of maybe the more boring aspects of some of the things that we do as a city, and just curious about your thoughts on that. And as we try to move forward and get help revitalize that language and learn the language where we can.
We're certainly really appreciative of that opportunity and, you know, working with various staff members. And at the end of the day, we take every opportunity as a teaching moment to understand the importance of the name and the teachings that are associated with each location. So we're really grateful, especially at the Chief and Council level, that our names are being reintroduced. So that's really critical to making a connection to the lands, in our opinion. So we do work with your staff on a regular basis, and we're really grateful.
Thank you for that. I don't see any other people raising their hands. I would like to add thanks both to Joan and Scott for making your presentations here. Scott, you mentioned earlier in your presentation what is called protocol. Protocol is the introduction that one gives when they come into a room. When I'm out in front of Rotary Clubs making presentations on travel journeys, I usually have someone introduce me in a Western style, which typically is about me and my accomplishments. And then I introduce myself through protocol, where I introduce the land, my parents, my grandparents, and where they came from. because we are all part and parcel of where we come from, not necessarily for our accomplishments. And there's a different mindset of the two. Each one of us has a protocol, and I would invite others to learn it. The way it's said is important, but not necessarily the language. It's nice to have it in Hulkaminum when you're on their territory, but on travel journeys, I've listened to it in many different languages, including English. So thank you very much for your presentation today. With that, I will thank you and wish you all the well in a new year, and looking forward to working with both of you in the future. Thank you. And with that, I think we'll move on. So, now for the meat of the meeting, so to speak. Animal responsibility bylaw, engagement results, and it's going to be introduced by Sheila Gurdy.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Robertson, who's attending via Zoom, and she'll be giving Council the presentation that's included in their agenda today. And this is to provide Council with the engagement results for the engagement period that they did from the draft bylaw that was brought to you earlier or late last year. And resulting from that bylaw draft was the engagement process that has gone through, and I just want to commend Ms. Robertson for a very thorough and thoughtful report, and she's going to go through those engagement result findings with you. So thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Chair Bonner and Council. I'm very pleased to be here today via Zoom to present the results from the public engagement opportunity and to bring forth some options for Council to consider on the bylaw based on that feedback. I've asked Allison Cupley and Leon Davis from the BCSCCA to also join me today in case Council has any questions regarding the standards of care provisions as we go along. And also Carly Kopak, who's the Pound and Adoption Coordinator, in case Council has any questions regarding enforcement. These folks are the experts, and particularly in their respective areas. So before we get into the engagement results, I thought it would be helpful to do a quick recap as to what prompted this project, particularly as it was November 9th, the last time that the draft bylaw was before Council, and because there may be members of the public watching for the first time on this topic. So I'll just go to share my screen now. First time doing this, I'm hoping it works. Here we go. How's that?
Good. We can see you.
Yeah, okay. Now, it doesn't want to go to the next slide here. I'll have to improvise here. Okay, so as Council may recall, the Animal Control Service delivery model had not been reviewed in several years. And so when we knew the contract with Nanaimo Animal Control was about to expire, Council took that opportunity to have a fulsome review conducted and retained Alan Nielsen of Nielsen Strategies in December 2019 to undertake that review. He was asked to examine the Animal Control Service, consult with stakeholders, conduct research on best practices and experience in other jurisdictions, and provide recommendations for Council in moving forward. So at the June 8th Council meeting in 2020, Mr. Nielsen did present his findings and presented a variety of recommendations, one of which was to direct staff to prepare a modernized bylaw that incorporated the recommendations outlined in this report. Then on July 6th, Council formally endorsed those recommendations. The provisions that Council supported at that meeting included removing reference to restricted dogs, changing the provisions related to vicious dog to aggressive dog, modernizing sections to reflect current best practices on standards of care, implementing mandatory identification for cats, requiring mandatory sterilization for outdoor cats, and prohibiting cats from running at large in a public place or in another person's property without their permission. Now, the consultant suggested using the SCCA model bylaw as a guide, given it was based on peer-reviewed studies, data-driven science, and it was legally vetted to be enforceable. And many municipalities across BC have used this model bylaw as their guide when modernizing their bylaws, and some of those closer to home included Victoria, Esquimalt, North Cowichan, and Duncan. Discussion got underway with the process in July 2020 and reached out to the various stakeholders who work closely with those provisions, and they included, of course, the BCFCCA, given that the bylaw was going to be based on their model bylaw, and Animal Control, as they're the ones who govern the bylaw provisions. The Catnap Society was consulted for the at-large provisions because we wanted to ensure that they were aware that their work would not be affected by the bylaw. And we consulted a beekeeping expert just to assist in clarifying some of the bee terminology. And of course, various departmental staff who would need to work with the bylaws. Once the final draft was developed, it was vetted by the municipal solicitor, and then the report and bylaw was made publicly available and presented to council on November 9th at the GPC. From there, the committee directed that the bylaw be forwarded to council on November 16th for consideration for first reading. And in this instance, public feedback started to come in once the agenda was distributed for that meeting, and in response to an article posted in the Nanaimo News Bulletin regarding the cat room provision. Many members of the public contacted council and wanted more opportunity to comment on the bylaw, and in response, council passed a motion asking that a specific online engagement opportunity be provided for 3 weeks. So prior to activating the engagement platform on the city's website, staff wanted to clarify some misinformation that was being circulated through social media, so developed a frequently asked question sheet. And this document, along with copies of the associated staff report, the consultant's original report, and a draft bylaw were placed on the city's website through Get Involved Nanaimo. Now, during that 3-week period, 444 individuals provided feedback, with 247 commenting on the Get Involved Nanaimo engagement platform, and 270 emails were sent directly to Mayor and Council. There's also a link to a petition with one of the emails addressed to Mayor and Council requesting that the city consider increasing the number of flock birds one could have. Now that individual subsequently did put a notation on there to redirect people to the engagement site. Further emails and letters were received after the close of the engagement period, and they were all forwarded to council for information, but they weren't included as part of this report because we had to have a cutoff for my deadline submission. So 6 major themes emerged throughout the engagement period. And so to make it easier for council, my plan for introducing the engagement feedback today is to sort of go over each individual theme individually. Go over the rationale of why the provision associated with that theme was included in the bylaw, provide a synopsis of the feedback received on that particular theme, both those who were in favor and opposed, and then present options where applicable for council to consider. So prior to making a decision on each theme, there would be an opportunity for council to ask questions on that theme. And then once the questions are responded to, the committee can then consider the options before them, and then once the decision is made, we'll move on to the next theme. So unless council has any questions so far, maybe we can get started. So, the first theme, and the one that generated the most engagement, relates to cats at large, which is governed within 2 sections of the draft bylaw. The first provision, which is under section 41, relates to prohibiting animals, which includes cats, running at large on private property without the owner's consent. The second provision, under section 47, relates to prohibiting animals, including cats, running at large on public property. The consultant's recommendation to include the provisions initially related to cats was based on research Canada-wide as well as the UK. Currently, Nanaimo has approximately 15,000 cats, and when left to roam, there are several negative consequences. These were outlined in my November 9th staff report, and the provisions to prohibit cats roaming freely were supported by the BCFCCA, Nanaimo Animal Control Provider, and the Catnap Society. During the engagement period, 392 citizens commented on this theme, and of those, 224, or 57%, were opposed to prohibiting cats at large, and 168, or 43%, supported the provisions. And the number opposed was not surprising, as currently there are no regulations regarding cat ownership. And as a parallel, 30 years ago, dogs were not regulated, and so when the provisions to regulate dogs were first implemented, there was that initial backlash at that time. The most commonly referred to reasons for not supporting the provisions included concerns with rodent control, and that was the #1 response. people not being able to retrain their cats to stay inside, belief that the provisions are unenforceable, certainly adding stress to citizens during COVID. Some believe that it's cruel to keep the cat indoors, and others cited that it's in the cat's nature to hunt. Many opposed also believe that if the bylaw were adopted, cats would actually be prohibited from going outdoors completely. And staff made best efforts to clarify that cats would still be allowed outdoors on one's property, and in fact, even allowed on your neighbor's property if they so choose. Another concern was that the city would somehow be on a campaign to round up cats that were at large, and that bylaw enforcement officers would be checking on individual property owners to ensure provisions of the bylaw were being met. This understandably would be very concerning, but it needs to be clarified that the city only acts on a complaint basis. It should be noted that bylaw enforcement is fully discretionary, and the goal is not to penalize responsible pet owners. In fact, the city's enforcement philosophy is to educate first, then seek compliance, and ticketing is always a last resort only when an owner is unwilling to take steps to comply and the situation has become problematic. Council actually has a policy in place for this particular bylaw, which states that staff are directed to only respond to complaints if the complainant lives within 100 meters of the residence of the bylaw infraction, or the complainant is directly impacted by the bylaw infraction. And this avoids frivolous complaints being taken from individuals who are not directly affected by non-adherence to the bylaw. Without these provisions, though, the city would be unable to take any reasonable steps to situations where cats do become a nuisance. For those that support the provisions, the main reasons cited included the impact on wildlife, particularly the bird population. This was the #1 response. Health concerns as toxoplasmosis from cat feces is a real health danger for some citizens. Cats using private property as a litter box, including those citing concerns of growing their own food where a cat is defecated. Spraying on personal property, concern for the welfare of cats, and being kept away by cat bites. Council also received a letter from Amy Wilson, Doctor of Veterinary Medicine, on December 11th, which was also signed by several other scientists and veterinarians that live and study wildlife on Vancouver Island. And in the letter she cites that the feline health, wildlife welfare, and conservation and public health concerns associated with free-roaming cats are so significant that the Canadian Veterinary Medical Association has recommended against free roaming and encourages municipalities to enact anti-roaming legislation. Now, the trend is in responsible pet ownership is moving towards prohibiting cats from roaming at large. And several cities throughout Canada, as cited on Nature Canada's website, including some of the larger ones, such as Edmonton and Calgary and Saskatoon, as well as several small towns and rural areas, and our neighboring municipalities of Victoria, Oak Bay, Esquimalt, Duncan, and Rock Cowichan, to name a few, have also adopted no roaming provisions. And based on this research and the recommendations provided by the consultant, and support from the SPCA, Nanaimo Animal Control and Catnap Society, and the professionals from the Canadian Veterinary Medical Association, staff is putting forward as one of the options for council to consider to option 1 to retain those provisions to prohibit cats running at large. Having said that, several concerns were expressed by owners of outdoor cats about the potential to have their cat impounded. They found this to be particularly stressful, and certainly while everyone is dealing with the stress of COVID. And to provide relief in that regard, particularly should council consider option 1, is to take a phased approach towards enforcement of the provisions through implementation of a promise to return policy. And this is the type of policy that the City of Calgary implemented when they first put in their new bylaw. And basically, under the policy, any owner of a cat that is sterilized and has identification that may get impounded would not be fined, and the cat would be returned to the owner free of charge. The policy could be for a 2-year period or another time determined by council, thereby giving owners of cats who go outdoors time to adjust to the provisions. It would also incentivize the sterilization and identification provisions, as the free charge would only apply in cases where the cat has been sterilized and has identification. And so should council be supportive of retaining the 2 provisions and be in favor of the promise of return policy, staff would recommend that council go with option 1. Option 2 provides for a compromise between cats at large on public property versus private property. Although 57% were opposed to the provisions, there was still 43% that were in favor, which shows that there is an issue. And so to ascertain how often complaints are received about cats, Nanaimo Animal Control conducted a trial log between September 24th and November 7th. And during that time, there were 20 calls documented related to cats. This averages 3 to 4 calls a week, and of those, 50% were related to nuisance cat complaints, and the other 50% related to feral cats. Carly, who is our pound and adoption coordinator, stated that this is typical in terms of complaints received. And should council be supportive of this option, the committee would pass a motion to retain section 41 to prohibit animals trespassing on private property, but amend section 47 to authorize to allow cats to run at large on public property. The third and final option for the committee's consideration would be the status quo, where cats will continue to be allowed to roam freely both on public and private lands, recognizing that under this option there would continue to be no option available for cats. So the 3 recommendations are before the committee, and just to quickly recap, under option 1, cats would be prohibited from being on large both public and private property. Option 2 is the compromise option, where cats would continue to be allowed to roam freely in public lands, but not on private property without permission. And option 3 is the status quo, where they would be allowed to do both. And so that concludes my presentation on theme 1. So I'm happy to take any questions council might have.
Thank you. And first up, we have Councillor Gusselbach.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question to you. Are we going to be addressing the recommendations after each section, or are we going to wait to the end?
I would prefer the council would debate the recommendations in front of them now, and then once they've made a decision, we would then move on to the next theme.
Excellent. In that case, I'd like to move option 1.
I have Councillor Gusselbach make a motion for option 1, and Councillor, if I remember, that would probably Armstrong second it, correct?
Yes.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Any discussion? Councillor Gusselbach, did you wish to talk on that?
I'm good.
Okay. Your worship.
Thank you, Chair. As is obvious from the presentation, and I want to thank Ms. Robertson for all her work on this, we have received as much communication from the public on this as any other issue, probably only with the exception of the whole mental health and addictions crisis in our streets as part of the larger homelessness issue. I'm in a position where I really like to hear from members of council, as opposed to this just sliding by, because we're certainly going to hear from the public when this goes out for public comment. And one of the things I want to raise is, what is the real problem we're trying to address? Is it domesticated cats that are the issue in the city, or is it feral cats? And if it's feral cats, then does the bylaw, at the same time it might inflame public opinion, really assist us in dealing with the feral cat issue, which seems to be an issue of whether or not we're going to support organizations that in fact deal with the feral cat issue. And so I'm looking forward perhaps to some further comment from council members as to how they feel. I'm not sure that any of these, option 3, I'm certainly in support of neutering, spaying, whatever the case may be, any animals within the city. But at the same time, I'm not entirely convinced there's public support for option 1 or option 2. And this is something that is going to require public support. Some may abuse the possibility of this bylaw, and others may take advantage of it, and I'm also conscious of the fact, just in the practical world, having grown up where I did in the time I did, cats are pretty difficult animals to control, and I'm not sure, as someone who formerly had cats at their house, I'd be prepared to lock up the cat 24/7 or pretend somehow that I'm going to be able to leash tether it or otherwise confine it to a backyard yard. We had cats that weren't supposed to climb trees, but they did, and they weren't supposed to climb fences, but they did, and they would disappear for a little while, although mercifully did not bring home birds. So I leave it to other members to comment, please.
Thank you. And I think perhaps going forward, it would be nice to hear a discussion, and then we'll have a motion maybe at the end as we work through these themes. My speakers list is Councillor Thorpe, then Armstrong, then Gaspar.
Thank you, Chair. If I'm next, I'll be happy to respond to the Mayor's request. And first of all, Ms. Robertson, I need to echo the thanks of the Mayor. I was very impressed with this report, given the complexity of some of these themes and the amount of feedback that we received from the public. I thought you did an excellent job of compiling and coordinating and responding. So the 6 themes, I think, are all important, but this one probably is the most controversial. I felt, reading your options, that I would support option 1. I would be okay with option 2, but I'm quite happy to support option 1, because I think you've made a real effort to, even in option 1, keep the city's response reasonable to problems that might occur. It's a moderate option. It allows some forgiveness, if I can use that term, and it certainly follows best practice that we see in other areas and the experts that you've consulted. So I'm really pleased with the options that you presented in all of the themes. Again, this is the most complex, I think, this theme, but I'm happy to support option 1. And I know we're certainly not going to keep everybody happy. We have to be prepared for that, but that's the nature of the beast. No pun intended. But I'll be interested in the comments of other councillors. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe. And Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. I'll be supporting option 1 as well. I heard from many people that are in support of it, especially those that do work with gardens and the cats are going through destroying them, defecating. In my neighborhood, we have constant cat fights at night, waking people up. And also, as reported stated, when we first looked at bringing in, the dogs can't roam freely, there was a lot of public outcry over that as well, but people got used to it. This is partly both public safety as well, because they can do damage, especially when they defecate in kids' sandboxes and stuff, as we've heard. And the biggest thing for me, which led me towards my decision, is when you have the associations of veterinarians all supporting this. So that's huge for me when they say that this needs to start happening. So for those reasons, I'll be supporting option 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. Councillor Gaspar.
Thank you, Chair. The cats at large provision, I can understand some of the concerns that were raised by community members. Cats are like family members to everybody, and everybody wants to make sure that has a cat, that their cat is happy and healthy. And this bylaw is not about penalizing cats, but it's about responsible cat ownership. We have to recognize and make evidence-based decisions, and we have 15,000 cats plus in the community, and with that does come with an impact both on the environment and also on other people's enjoyment of the property. Issues is listed around, cats using people's places in garden beds and sandboxes, litter box, sitting out in front of bird feeders, predating on songbirds, and the bylaw that's been put in place has been recommended by the groups in town that are dealing with cats directly. The SPCA, Animal Control has repeatedly demonstrated that cats, there's a lot of calls and complaints, and action does need to be taken on building a bylaw around responsible pet ownership, and this is not about tethering every cat. It's about having provisions in place for the most egregious offenders, where a bylaw officer can intervene. I received a call from somebody that there was a neighbor that was so infuriated by their cat continually going into the garden and defecating that the gentleman had set up a trap in a trap with cats. And that's the type of conflict that we do not want to have emerging in our community, and it can be easily regulated by a bylaw officer coming and intervening and providing some education first, and supporting responsible pet ownership. And you know, in our bylaws, it's very important for everybody to be aware that our bylaws are complaint driven, and so what that means is a complaint must be made, and then there's also regulations around, you know, that the complainant must live within 100 meters of the residence of the bylaw infraction, and that the complaint is directly impacted by the bylaw infraction. So these provisions in place so that this is not going to be onerous in terms of implementing, and is really just going to support responsible pet ownership that most cat owners are not going to be concerned about. And so I think that the concern around this bylaw is grossly blown out of proportion, and I think that going forward we're going to see that this is best practice that's being implemented in Calgary, Edmonton, and all across the country, and that you know, it was time for us to put this in place. So I really appreciate the effort made by Ms. Robertson. This is very professionally done bylaw, and the engagement with the community and attempts to clarify misunderstandings was over and above. And so if I had a hat, I would take it off and thank you, and wish to just move forward on so that we can attend to more pressing matters in the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Gussabrack. I don't see any more people with their hand up, so I'll take this opportunity. Hello? Zinni, put your hand up so I can see you, because I can't see.
It is, it's Zena.
No, put your blue hand up so I can see that.
I can't find it.
Okay, then just jump in, we're good.
Okay, thank you. Like the mayor, I'm kind of struggling with this one. Although Council Gussabrack, you've presented a very good argument why we should support this. Where I struggle with, and maybe I can be assisted here, this is complaint driven. I get that, and that's good. Most bylaws are complaint driven. We're not out there trying to catch somebody who's not following our bylaws. But how do you, with a cat, handle a complaint? Like, I'm trying to understand, we put this bylaw in place, it's not like you can usually catch cats. Like, I'm not fitting how we would respond to a complaint. It's not like a dog.
I think, Mrs. Robinson, you would like to respond?
I think it would be really great to hear from Ms. Carly Kolpak. She probably would be able to walk council through that. So perhaps she'd like to chime in?
Sure, I can comment on that. It's a good question. Typically, the cat-related complaints that we receive right now and that we're currently unable to respond to can be kind of placed into two categories. There are complaints from property owners who are frustrated with their neighbors' cats trespassing, and as some other councillors mentioned, common issues in terms of defecating in gardens and killing songbirds. Those complaints, if the complainant knows who owns the cat, which neighbor, then it's quite straightforward, and the animal control officer would start by making contact with the owner of the animal and going from there, whether it begins with education or a warning, and kind of going from there with the ultimate enforcement action being a ticket if it came to that. If the complainant does not know where this cat is coming from or who owns it, it does become more complex, because you can't tell by looking at a cat whether or not it is an owned cat or a feral cat or a lost or abandoned cat. So there are several courses of action. For example, the City of Victoria, when they receive a complaint about a nuisance cat and the owner is unknown, they would distribute a letter to all the neighboring properties informing them that there has been reports of a nuisance cat in that area, inviting them to contact with animal control if they had any questions or concerns about their own cat. And if we don't get anywhere with that sort of blanket warning, then a trap could be set on the complainant's property and the cat could be impounded. That would be in a case if the cat is not friendly enough to simply be, picked picked up and put in a carrier and brought into the pound. Once here, the animal would be checked for identification, so a tattoo or microchip, and ideally, if one of those was in place, we'd be able to contact the owner right away, and they would be given the opportunity, of course, to claim their cat, and an impound fee would be in place. The other type of complaint that we frequently receive from people is just concern for a cat. You know, they've got a cat hanging around their house or their property, and they don't know if it's owned, and might be noticing it's getting a bit thinner, and just concerned that it might not have a home or it might be lost. And in those cases, we would also ask the complainant to take a couple of steps in terms of determining if this cat is truly unowned or feral or what's going on with it. So that might look like posting on some of the local social media sites for lost and found pets, saying, this cat's been around my property, I'm just worried about it, does anybody recognize it? There's also a paper collar trick that can be utilized. So, writing a note on a piece of paper just saying, hey, this cat's been hanging around, I'm a little bit worried, and I just want to know if it has an owner, and then you can kind of fold it into a collar shape and tape it around the cat's neck. And so we would kind of handle each situation individually and then bring cats into the pound if their ownership status is unknown, ultimately.
Thank you. Thank you. That helps a great deal, actually. I believe I can support option number one because of the having within the policy the promise to return and for a 2-year period. So those that are responsible cat owners, as it says, if they've been sterilized and if they've been, if they can be identified, they will be returned without any fees. So I believe now I can support option one. Thank you.
We have anything else on the list? I don't see any. Councilor Hemmings just popped in.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask a clarifying question. The difference between option one and option two is that we're not allowing, if we go with option two, cats are allowed to roam on public land. Is that accurate? So it's not actually addressing that point of conflict that we're trying to resolve. Because the point of conflict exists on private property, not public land. So I'm just trying to, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think this was a bit more of a recourse for at least providing an option for those on private property. Because right now, as I alluded to earlier, 43% have concerns about it, and there is calls coming in, 3 or 4 per week. And so the challenge for private property owners that have no recourse is that, simply an animal control can't do anything right now. And so without that clause, sometimes that private property owner will take matters into their own hands because there's nothing that the city could do for them. So this was just a way to look at, okay, if council was still supportive of transitioning this, it would provide an option for somebody that has a nuisance cat on their private property. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I don't see anybody else with hands up, so I'll pop in here at this point. One question, if I may, to Ms. Robinson. Of the 43% opposed to cats roaming, is it your opinion that the majority of those complaints would be in them roaming on their own private property?
Let me go back to my notes here. I would probably say yes. I mean, Cardi may be able to chime in again as well about, because they're the ones that received the complaint, so I might defer to her to see if she has any insight on that. If I recall, most of them related to the songbirds. It related to the cat feces in the gardens. Generally on public property, there probably wouldn't be as many concerns there, but again, Cardi might have a little bit more insight on that.
Yeah, there are, it is certainly most common to receive complaints about cats on someone's private property, and for the reasons that we've already explained. And then it gets into some safety concerns as well, with cats attacking the resident cat or even the residents of that property. It's not a frequent complaint, but it does happen. In terms of in public places, I would expect to receive fewer nuisance complaints in public places and more of those complaints about concerns. So, for example, if somebody had been noticing a cat that they were concerned about in a park, and that person was worried that that cat was unowned or abandoned, then the bylaw would allow us to impound that cat and then subsequently determine again its ownership status and what's going on with that cat and whether it has an owner to be returned to, or if it needs to be adopted or vetted or what's going on.
Thank you for
So
that.
without that provision, the animal control wouldn't respond to those instances if there's nothing for public property.
Or could they respond if they thought the cat was in distress?
Yes, we certainly would, yeah, regardless of what option was chosen. If there was a cat who was clearly in distress, sick or injured, we would respond regardless for the welfare of the animal.
So I'm thinking I'm more interested in option 2 than option 1. I think option 2 covers all of that. It specifically relates to cats on private property, which I think majority of our complaints are coming in. We still have an option to pick up cats that aren't on private property in the event that we think there's a problem. So I'd be more interested in option 2. I do know that Councillor Brown wishes to speak, so I'll let him go ahead.
Thanks, Chair, and your question answered some of the ones I had. I'm just trying to get an idea around scope here, around how many calls do we actually get per year in relation to the public lands aspect of option 2.
I don't have that number in front of me. I could, as Ms. Robertson mentioned, we did do a trial log because without the bylaw currently in place, we're not documenting the calls because it's not something that's within our scope. But the majority are on private property, I think, for sure. I can say that without looking at the statistics.
Yeah, and I think just to go back, the trial log stated that 50% were related to nuisance cat complaints, and the other 50% related to feral. So I'm assuming that the feral would be the public land.
Well, actually, they were specific to feral cats. They were more. It was 50% nuisance and 50% concerned that the cat may be feral. Again, it's really difficult to make that determination while a cat is outside. An owned cat who's been out on its own and lost for a while can have a lot of the same behaviors as a feral cat. And we actually find that it takes, a couple days of being impounded and regular food and care for a cat to sort of calm down, and we can determine its true nature, whether it's feral or whether it's a domesticated cat that has become stray.
Thank you for that.
One question follow-up, please, Chair.
Sure.
So, if I'm reading this or understanding this correctly, if a neighbor doesn't mind a cat coming into their property, no issue because nobody is reporting it. But if somebody sees a cat on the street, they can call it in, and then, even if it's just crossing the street to get to that neighbor's house, then it might be an issue. That's what I'm trying to figure out, from an enforcement perspective, how do we determine if the cat's actually a nuisance? That's what I'm trying to get at, I guess.
Right, yeah, we do need to kind of screen the calls and take each call in its own context. If a cat is simply just crossing the street and someone sees it, first of all, it's unlikely that it would still be there when we responded anyway. That just general complaint is not something that will be likely responded to unless there's some cause for concern. Maybe the cat appears to be injured, or it's the same cat cat that they see on the street all the time. That is actually a complaint that we do receive occasionally, which is there's this certain cat that lays in the middle of the road every sunny day on my street, and I have to drive around it, and I'm very worried about its safety. That's something that we could look into for the cat's welfare, but generally just somebody reporting that a cat was outdoors would not be a priority.
Okay, thank you very much.
I have Councillor Armstrong and then Gesselbach.
The reason I oppose number 2, the public property, is like, we're looking at food security as an issue, and if we look at community gardens, and then if cats start digging in there's no recourse for that. The other thing too is a lot of our playgrounds are sandboxes, and again, cat feces can be very dangerous to certain individuals, so that's why I'm opposed to public property as well. I also think that most of these cases will be resolved very easily by speaking to the owners, or like in my particular case, I have a cat that comes into my yard regularly. I don't care. He doesn't do any damage. I haven't seen any birds. But I think for those people that really do care, it's a way for them to have a mechanism to deal with it. So that's why I'm opposed to the public place. I think we need to protect our children in the parks from some of these, and I know they're rare occasions, but they still happen. So for me, that's why I'm for number 1. Thank you.
And Councillor Gesselbach.
Thank you. I think that, the concerns from some councillors about maybe just limiting the bylaw to private places, that the concern that it's going to limit cats, that we only need to deal with the private property, will unnecessarily limit the bylaw, and I think the volume of calls that we'll get from people about cats on public property is going to be very minimal, that it's not going to make a difference, but if we don't include it, it's going to limit the bylaw officer's ability to respond to cases of like what Councillor Armstrong mentioned, and in egregious cases of predation and that. And I think that we need to start thinking long-term in the bylaws that we're putting in place, because we're in an urban center. We're no longer a rural community where you have a barn cat that goes out and can hunt rats and birds at a whim. Our population density is only going to increase. And although there's a set of cats right now that are used to roaming, and that is, something that we're going to have to deal with, we would like the SPCA, we'd like individuals selling cats to really educate and support the community on keeping their cats within a reasonable distance of home, and training that cat to be more indoors, because 20, 30 years down the line, this will only become more of an issue, and this bylaw allows the foundation to start building that understanding in the community so that we don't end up in a situation where we have to keep cats that are used to roaming around inside. They'll already be used to that type of care. And so it's important to think long term. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gesselbach. Councillor Brown just disappeared, so we don't have any more hands. In that case, I'm going to call the question on the motion is for option 1. Could I have all those, can't see everybody on the screen.
Could you just ask for those to speak to those opposed once it gets to that part? So all those in favor can raise their hands, and when they're opposed, if they could just speak for me.
Thank you. So all those in favor of option 1, raise your hand, please. Okay, I have 2. Oh, oh yeah, no, that's...
Yeah,
okay.
just that, yeah.
All those opposed, raise your hand. Or say out loud.
Aaron's opposed.
And Councillor Bonner is opposed. Speaking to the third person here. That's 2 opposed. The motion passes 7-2. Okay. Right, thanks very much. 6-2?
I think Councillor Turley's.
Wait, sorry. All right, and thank you very much, Carly, for telling us how to capture cats. If you have any idea on how I could herd cats as chair, that would be very nice. Let's move on now to theme 2.
Okay, morning, Mr. Chair. So this one, thank goodness, is a little bit easier. And this relates to mandatory identification of cats. And as noted in my November 9th report, the percentage of animals reunited with their owners in a community is directly connected to identification. And so having this provision will greatly assist in that regard. And there was 89 citizens who commented on this clause. 95% were in favor and only 5% opposed. So given sort of the enormous support, staff recommend that the committee reaffirm the provision as outlined on the slide, which is section 60 in the draft bylaw, unless council has any questions on this theme.
I don't see any hands popping up. Look, Councillor Gesselbrock, you're not muted, so you might want to do that. Is there any questions? Okay, then let's move on to the options.
That's it, Mr. Chair. It's just this one before council, unless the direction is to do otherwise. Given the support for it, there were no additional options for this.
I see.
Unless council's opposed to it and wants to change direction.
His worship has...
I move the recommendation.
A recommendation moved by Cheryl Armstrong, seconded by his worship. And I believe, Cheryl, did you wish to speak to it?
No, for me, it's pretty easy to do. Thanks.
Your worship. Okay. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak to this? Seeing none, I will then call the question. All those in favor, raise your hands. Any opposed, speak out. Hearing none, that motion is passed as well. And for another day, theme 3.
Okay. Theme 3 relates to the mandatory sterilization for any cat over the age of 6 months. We received 102 comments, with 94% supporting the provision and 6% opposed. Those in support commented that mandatory sterilization was part of being a responsible pet owner. And I also previously highlighted in my November 9th report that cats that have been sterilized actually cause serious instances in the community than intact animals do. Those that were opposed were cat breeders, believing it would affect their ability to breed cats as a business, and this was part of the education process through the FAQs, where this provision does not apply for breeding purposes. I also identified in November 9th that the SPCA annually runs a low-cost spay-neuter program to low-income families to have their pets sterilized, and also free microchipping as part of that program. And so to incentivize this even further, staff recommend that fines be reduced upon proof of sterilization for cats that might get impounded. So should there be support for the mandatory sterilization, there would need to be fines for those who don't have their cat sterilized and allow them to be outdoors. We certainly want to try and avoid that. So while the ultimate goal is to encourage mandatory sterilization, staff recommend that an impound fee be set at $100 for unsterilized cats, but with a promise to refund them $75 upon proof of sterilization in 30 days. So what we're trying to do is to ultimately get the sterilization done, so we don't want to further penalize the person and in hopes that they would take that fine and use the money towards sterilizing their cat, so it would reduce it down to $25. And so if council or if the committee is in support, both recommendations are outlined on the slide.
Thank you. Does anybody wish to comment on this? I would looking for a recommendation then. Worship?
I'll move the recommendation.
I have Councillor Thorpe moving the recommendation, seconded by his worship. I do have a question. I don't see any other questions, so this should be quick. It's actually to Mr. Davis. Leon, is 30 days a relatively good amount of time for someone to get a cat sterilized?
It is normally. COVID has definitely complicated things a little bit, and it can be difficult to get some vet appointments, so there might be on a case-by-case basis that you might want to extend that, but certainly you can get an appointment booked and confirmed with a vet, so if somebody can say, I tried, and for the earliest we can get was 40 days, but my appointment's been made, I think we would want to give people some leniency given the circumstances currently.
Okay. And Ms. Robinson?
Yeah, I apologize. That was something I mentioned in my November 9th report, that there was a little bit of backup because of COVID, so certainly we would be working with the individuals. If they couldn't get it within the 30 days, you know, if they had an appointment booked for 45 or something, absolutely staff would use their best judgment and discretion in those instances.
Okay, thank you for that. So we have a motion, it's on the floor, seconded. No further questions I'm seeing, in which case I will call the question. All those in favor, raise your hands. And those opposed, speak out. Hearing none, that motion passes. And next for the theme park of Nanaimo, theme 4.
So theme 4 relates to the comments on the removal of the breed-specific legislation, or BSL as I might refer to it, and the aggressive dog provision. And under the city's current bylaw, restrictive dogs were defined with specific breeds as outlined on the slide. And these breeds are required right now to be muzzled while the dog is anywhere other than on the land or premises owned or occupied by the dog owner. And the new bylaw sees the definition removed and replaced with aggressive dog. And that definition would more be in line with reflecting the aggressive behavior of any dog, regardless of breed. 16 people submitted comments on this section, and 10 were in support and 6 opposed. For those opposed, they believe that the pit bull breeds tend to be more aggressive, but there are no efficient methods to determine a dog's breed in a way that can withstand legal challenge, especially with the mixed breeding there. A couple of concerns were also expressed that there was not an appeal process for the owner whose dog had been deemed aggressive by the pound keeper. But in fact, under Section 84, there is the opportunity for owners to apply after 2 years from the designation, provided we don't receive any further complaints. And there is also an appeal process under Section 30. So if the owner is unwilling to comply with the aggressive dog provisions prior to any licenses being canceled, the owner can certainly appeal to the manager of bylaw services, and the procedure for that was outlined in the bylaw. Other suggestions put forward related to providing incentives through reduced licensing fees for dogs that are spayed and neutered, and increased license fees for dogs that have been deemed aggressive. And these were recommended by the consultant. So the first recommendation for theme 4 supported is to simply reaffirm inclusion of the aggressive dog definition as stated. And the second recommendation would see the proposed dog license fees increased for unsterilized dogs and dogs deemed aggressive, and it would be effective for 2022. In both instances, the amounts were identified in the consultant's report. These are the amounts he has suggested based on our fees, and those were supported by council in July.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question. It was brought to my attention specifically by a member of the public, and being a dog owner, I guess I just missed it, and it was a good catch. The clause C says aggressively pursued or harassed a person or companion animal or livestock. I think it's very hard for some individuals to determine what an aggressive pursuit is in relation to dogs. As a dog owner, I know they can be very excited and it can be perceived as aggressive. So I'm just curious on how something like that gets evaluated and enforced upon, because, you know, most likely the animal control bylaw enforcement folks aren't there at the time of the pursuit. So how does it sort of get looked at and adjudicated, and what determines whether it meets the description of aggressive dog in those cases?
So maybe through the chair, Carly could probably respond to that one.
Sure, yeah. So right now, when an animal control officer is investigating a dog attack or a bite, they would gather whatever evidence is available to them, because of course, as Councillor Brown mentioned, we're not there. And that often, whenever possible, includes written statements from both parties, the dog owner of the dog that is being complained about, as well as the victim or complainant. And it can be difficult to determine, but that is part of the duty of an animal control officer to, you know, ask people for specific descriptions of specific behaviors, and also considering the context was there a toy involved, or is this property protection, or really understanding the nature of the dog's behavior. But ultimately, it does come down to the kind of experience and judgment of the animal control officer as to whether or not the behavior is threatening to public safety or was not.
So, if I may follow up, that's where I'm having a difficulty between A and C. So I get it if the dog, has attacked, bitten, or, ran up to someone, bit their dog, very aggressive behavior. But, I had an example the other day where one of my dogs just happened to get off leash as it was walking, slipped his collar, ran across the street to see another dog. Person picked it up, quite scared. I get it, he's a big dog, 120 pounds, very accidental. He was excited to see the other dog. They deemed it, I think, from their perspective, it's probably scary and very aggressive. So that's where but there was no bite, there was no harm, there was no, so how do you, in those scenarios, is now he classified as an aggressive dog through the enforcement if someone calls the number and reports it, right?
Yeah, so the difference between A and C, so I could, one example may be, I believe that in this draft bylaw, biting is defined as an act that breaks skin. So I think an officer would consider, for example, recently we had a person attacked and their skin was not broken, but their jacket was absolutely torn to bits, and they were knocked over and bruised, and that sort of thing could be evidence that the dog's behavior was aggressive and could have potentially caused injuries if perhaps that jacket was quite as thick. That's one example. I mean, they all have different contexts, and there is something called a vicious dog caution that we utilize as well, which is sort of a firm and final warning that says that this behavior, is concerning. If you have further complaints, your dog may be designated as an aggressive dog. So there's sort of at least one stage in between where maybe there wasn't evidence that it was a very threatening behavior, but it was something inappropriate. That caution could be utilized as well.
Right, okay, yeah, I'm just having trouble with that distinction between A and C, because I think, dogs do have their own nature. They do like to chase things, and, we do our best as dog owners, but I think I definitely agree there's a difference when it starts to enter into the world of harm and things like that, but, the dogs do run after things, so that's where I was trying to figure out what is the difference between A and C, and how is it really differentiated in practice?
Ms. Robertson.
Mr. Chair, maybe somebody, either Leon or Allison from the SPCA, might have some additional information on that.
I can quickly jump in. So, Councillor Brown, just to kind of address your specific incident, I think that was really speaking to what Carly was saying about it's part of the bylaw enforcement officer's job to pick up the nuances on the situation, and the whole point is not to punish your average pet guardian. So if your dog has escaped his leash, ran across, and that person did report you, I'm sure the bylaw officer would ask follow-up questions such as, was the animal baring its teeth? Was it wagging its tail? Was it barking? Did it jump up on you to get at the dog after? They could probably determine from that situation that your dog was just excited to see the other dog, and while it's frightening to be confronted with that when you have a smaller dog, it might turn into more of an off-leash infraction than this aggressive dog. But the nuance is huge in these kinds of situations, so it is kind of hard to get that general framework of what does this look like in practice, because each situation is different as well. I'm sure an officer wouldn't respond to a very vicious Chihuahua the same way that they would for like a Doberman or a large breed dog as well, because there is that distinction to the level of harm that can come.
Thank you for that. Next on my list, I have Councillor Armstrong, and then Ms. Worship.
Oh, sorry, Tyler asked a question, thank you.
Okay.
Forgot to lower my hand.
Go, sir.
Thank you, Chair Bonner. I just want to note that the definition section of biting means the breaking, puncturing, or bruising of the skin by an animal with its teeth. So it's covered, if you will. So if you aggressively tear the jacket apart, but you don't break the skin, but you cause bruising, you're going to be in that category.
Thank you for that definition. Do we have anybody else wishing to speak? In that case, I will pop in here. I too had a problem with item C. I think it could be better worded if we removed companion animal and just said that C2 has, while running at large, aggressively pursued or harassed a person without justifiable provocation, or has demonstrated a propensity, tendency, or disposition to do so. And the reason being is I have a big black dog who loves to chase horses. Rather dangerous sport, but when he is chasing a horse when he's not supposed to, but he does it anyway, you would think he's trying to kill the horse, but he's not. He just wants to play with it. So but he sounds extremely aggressive and he barks loud, that sort of thing. In addition to that, I would think that even the smallest animals, that if they happen to walk by and someone had a pet rat somewhere, they would attack it without concern. And that is the nature of dogs, is to do that. So I have a concern about that one word, or companion animal. And if that wasn't in there, I would be much more in favor of this. Some of the other things I have questions on is regarding the definition and the consequences of being termed an aggressive animal. I quite like the bylaw presented by the SPCA on aggressive dogs, and it's actually quite involved, and there's a fair amount to it. But it talks about sort of like a 2 strikes and you're out type of scenario, where one person receives ticketed, and then if the offense isn't too onerous, then they're given a bit of time, and if it happens again, then they get a designation of aggressive dogs. I'm wondering why we didn't go down that road. And it would be either to Ms. Robinson or Mr. Davis. Mr. Robinson.
I just wanted to respond to your question about a rat or so. Companion animal is defined in the bylaw, and it really boils down to pretty much a cat and a dog. It excludes livestock, it excludes poultry and small animals. So I just wanted to clarify the companion animal definition. I missed the second part, so I think I got lost a little bit in which part you were trying to remove.
It was in terms of the designation of how an animal is perceived as aggressive, and the consequences thereof. The SPCA bylaw recommendations are quite involved, and from what I understand, there's like a 2 strikes and you're out type of scenario, where there's a 2-step process before being considered as a aggressive dog. So I was wondering if you could speak to that part of it, why we didn't go that route.
Through the chair to Allison, are you able to respond?
The BCSBCA, our model bylaw, talks about more of a tiered system, which is a whole new ball of wax in terms of your bylaw enforcement. So there is that little provision about to kind of account for those one-off situations where a warning will be given if the complaint is found to exhibit behavior again, then it will be deemed an aggressive dog kind of officially. However, that doesn't stop a bylaw officer from going directly from aggressive dog into the vicious dog categorization, but that is the tiered system, where it would be aggressive kind of covers dogs that may have exhibited one thing during training or before future behavioral intervention, so the owner can apply for release from that designation, and then it goes to aggressive dog or vicious dog, and then dangerous dog. And the dangerous dog is one with the muzzle provisions and things like that, whereas vicious dog is kind of the designation that most animal control bylaws would call an aggressive dog, or the only designation that was available for aggressive dogs previously. We kind of just added in an extra category beforehand to allow for those circumstances where maybe it was out of normal behavior for the animal, but still needed to be noted for public health and safety.
Okay, thank you. And just before going to Councillor Armstrong, kind of question regarding insurance. I spoke to my insurance company today. damage caused by animals, pets, are not covered under your household insurance, and they weren't sure of where one could get that. And if we're going to require aggressive dogs to have liability insurance, which names the city for $1 million, I'm looking at that as possibly quite an onerous and expensive endeavor. So I was wondering, why are we looking at that part of it? Why including insurance? Ms. Robinson?
Through the chair, I'm not sure what your insurance company, well, obviously they said no to you, but this provision has been in place in our neighboring municipalities, so I followed up with them, and people that have fallen in that category were in fact covered under their health insurance for this. So I'm not sure about your specific insurer, but they have been approved in neighboring municipalities.
I say that because I specifically asked them about this and sent them the information, and they said that your household liability insurance does not cover damages done by your pet to somewhere else. But I'm not sure. I have trouble moving forward if I don't know the answer to that. That's what I got from the insurance company.
That would be just different because I did confirm that in fact it has occurred. The insurance has covered it in cases in Duncan, and it was covered under the house insurance. So I don't know where else to go with that.
Okay.
I can answer.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, that would be highly unusual, Councillor Bonner, for an insurance company to say that's not included. It's an actual inclusion and all liability for home insurance. If your pets, if they cause any bodily injury or property damage to a third party, your liability should cover it. I don't know if you used the word aggressive or vicious dog when you were asking.
I think I used the word aggressive, but...
Okay, so what you would have to do in that case, you may have a bit of a challenge if a bylaw officer has deemed your dog aggressive or vicious. That's when a home insurance company may put an exclusion on your policy. But other than that, unless you've got an exclusion in your policy, I don't know of any home insurance policy that doesn't include it. But if you have an aggressive dog, they would have to make special arrangements.
Okay, I think that's where they were coming from, is when I use the term aggressive dog designation. They tend to shy away from that. And I just renewed my house insurance, so maybe I have to look around a bit next year.
Well, the other thing is, if the insurance company was not informed that it was aggressive, there really isn't wording that really addresses that, so you would still have coverage. An insurance company would be hard not covering.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. I just wanted to address C, where it was aggressively pursued, and we had a couple cases of this when I was working previously. And that covers off when the dog is chasing you and you're able to get into your house. That's an aggressive pursuit. They haven't caused any injury, but there's definitely intent to hurt, so that's why I believe that is really important to keep that in there. Because we do have people that are managed to get in their house. There was that incident in Cinnabar there where she did manage to get the girl in the house before she was really mauled, although she was mauled in that case. But if she would have got her in sooner and she didn't get mauled, then we would not have any recourse to deal with that dog. So that's why I believe that's really important to keep that in there. And I think the other thing that we're forgetting about is that the bylaw and the pound and everybody investigating this, they're very good at this and they do have discretion and they will ask the right questions. So I think it's important that it stays there. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Davis, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention about the piece of the companion animal. A couple things. I mean, first of all, the amount of distress that's being caused to the companion animal or horse that's being pursued by an aggressive dog is something that we want to consider. And also, a lot of times when people are end up getting bitten by an aggressive dog, it's it's because that trigger was that they were going after the companion animal, and often even if the dog isn't harassing the person, if the person tries to get involved to protect their pet, pick them up or push the dog away, that's when it can turn into kind of an attack on a person. So I think it's probably important that the companion animal, which is often the trigger part, is still in there, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. Cheryl, your hand's still up. No, not anymore, thank you. Is there, at this point, Ms. Robinson, where did you want to go with this? You just looking for a recommendation and then a vote?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I'm looking for a recommendation for both at the same time?
Yes, please, yes.
Yeah. Okay, then I have a motion by Councillor Hemmens, seconded by Councillor Martin. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask those to raise your hands in favor. And those opposed to say out. I have Councillor Baum, Councillor Gesselbrock, you still have your hand up. Is that opposed? You're in favor. Councillor Gesselbrock, are you in favor or opposed?
I'm in favor.
Okay, you're not keeping up with me, that's good. And I'm also opposed, so that's it's 6-2, that motion passes. Thank you. Theme number 5.
Okay, we're almost towards the end here. This one relates to limit on pets. And the city received a total of 41 responses from those that were specific about whether they were in favor of pet limits or opposed. And of those, 63% were opposed and 37% were in favor. Again, they're new provisions. We've had absolutely no limit on our bylaw right now, so it's understandable that there was some more opposition. There was also a link to a petition that opposed the limit on flock birds to 4, and that was emailed to Mayor and Council, and that was probably the most popular one. Sort of peppered throughout responses to other matters were questions and concerns about pet limits. So I thought the easiest way to break it down would just be to go by animal categories. And so under dogs and cats, the bulk of those opposed were from commercial breeders, believing that they would be unable to have more than 4 dogs or 5 cats. But the provisions for this bylaw are based on an average animal owner. They're not geared to commercial breeders, and so particularly not to those that are sold for utility or profit by commercial breeders. Those individuals or those breeders are covered under the zoning bylaw, and therefore any changes in that regard would need to be done through a zoning amendment. Provisions were included though for your average home-based breeders, which is those that breed under 15 pups, to be able to provide them with an opportunity to have more than the pet limit while 4 dogs are under the age of 16 weeks, or cat breeders to possess more than 5 cats under the age of 12 weeks. Others had cited concerns, and this was a big one, that they would have to give up their existing pets in order to meet the limit. And the city, by all means, would never expect an owner to surrender any pets one has prior to the bylaw being adopted. This is not to penalize responsible pet owners. They just wouldn't be allowed to replace them until the bylaw limits are met. Those that expressed support cited noise and smell and standards of care from those having too many as the main reasons for wanting to see the limit. In terms of the small flock birds, the city, as I alluded to, received many comments about that, and the small flock birds include your finches, canaries, budgies, and lovebirds. And they cite that the limit of 4 is challenging given that the flock birds do better in groups. So staff followed up with a member of the Vancouver Island Bird Club who advised that 12 would be an acceptable number. She recognized what the intent of the bylaw was. We're trying to ensure that we have some assistance should there be a hoarding situation, but 12 they felt was a good number. And 4 for the larger hook-billed birds. So these are your parrots and cockatoos and stuff. They are not flocked. They don't need to bond with groups. They bond with their owner. So I followed up with the SPCA and Nanaimo Animal Control, and they expressed support for the increase in that area. Owners of small rodents also expressed the same concerns, citing that they also do better in small groups. Reptiles were not additionally identified, and they should be included with the allowable number of animals similar to those outlined for companion animals, so it would be 6. And fish, only a few comments were received, and there isn't any really bylaws that I came across that saw limits on fish, so those weren't specifically mentioned in other jurisdictional bylaws. So there would be nothing wrong with having more than 12 fish in a tank in your home or in your pond. So through the initial draft, the provisions related to pet limits proposed that an individual could have up to 6 companion animals as well as 4 small animals, and that included your rodents, birds, rabbits, etc. And this meant that a person could potentially own 10 pets. So based on the feedback received and after conducting further research, staff is putting forward a revised limit of 12 pets, but with parameters as outlined in the recommendation. And this will address the concerns of those who own flock birds and small rodents. So under those new provisions, just as an example, somebody could have 8 flock birds, 2 dogs, a cat, and a rabbit, or maybe they simply want 12 small flock birds, or maybe 4 dogs, 2 cats, 4 hamsters, and 2 rabbits. So it opens it up a little bit, but it really addressed that expanding to the flock birds and small rodents. So the recommendation is before council on the screen, and it would be to direct staff to replace what was the pet limit on the bylaw previously and replace it with the following as outlined on the screen. So if council has any questions on that one?
Sure. Any questions?
Councilor Hammonds?
Mr. Davis, you still have your hand up?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So, I don't see any questions, so I'm looking for a motion on the recommendation. Councilor Hammonds, making that motion. We have a seconded by Councilor Martman. Is there any discussion? Seems like it's flowing well. In that case, I don't see any on my list. I will call the question. All those in favor, raise your hand to say aye. Any opposed, speak out, please. Hearing none, that motion is passed. Thank you. Theme 6, there we go.
Theme 6, okay. So this is just the bylaw in general. And there was 95 submissions with people either citing support for the bylaw in general or opposed to the bylaw in general. And of those, 62% were in favor and 38% opposed. One individual requested several wording changes to the bylaw, both via an email as well as through the Get Involved in Nanaimo site, and identical suggestions were also submitted to a letter addressed to our council after the deadline had passed. The changes were considered, however, some of the provisions would really be tailored to specialized groups, and other suggestions were just worded in ways that wouldn't be enforceable and not based on best practices. And we really appreciate the efforts that this individual went to putting it forward, and an extensive response was provided. However, the nuance involved in the drafting and vetting and enforcement of the bylaws is extremely challenging, and there's just a lot of other things at play or other pieces of legislation, and we have to ensure that we can withstand these provisions withstand a legal challenge. Having said that, the bylaw is a living document, and any issues that may arise in the future can certainly be brought forward to council for amendments. And so no other further changes to the bylaw are being recommended at this time. And if council is supportive of that, then we would just look to the recommendation to direct staff to incorporate the committee's preferred options into the animal responsibility bylaw, and then direct staff to forward that revised bylaw to council's consideration of first reading.
Thank you for that. Prior to getting a recommendation on the floor, does anybody have any specific changes other than me that they'd like to make to the wording of the bylaw? Not seeing any hands pop up, so in that case, I'll get started in a few of these. There's not a lot. The question of choke collar, it's listed in the definitions, and as it says, a choke collar is a slip collar. but everybody in the industry calls it a slip collar. So I'm wondering why we just don't call it a slip collar as opposed to a choke collar.
Through the chair, perhaps Allison could address that one?
Yeah, it's a great question. The reason why slip collar is commonly used by proponents of choke collars is because they don't like the optics and the way that it sounds when we call it a choke collar. They try to find different terminology to hide what the technology actually does, but the SPCA in general does not support the use of these devices because they cause anxiety and fear. Most recent scientific evidence, it demonstrates that dogs trained with these kind of implements, including choke, prong, and shock collars, are actually more likely to exhibit aggressive behavior later on. So that is kind of the difference between the terminologies. Slip collar is also commonly confused with either the kind for cats that are the quick release, or standard martingales, which we actually do approve of, which is half cloth with only the chain portion composing a small little portion of it, but not enough to actually restrict the trachea of an animal.
Okay, that's exactly the wording they had when I was talking to this person, that it was the word choke collar was meant to elicit an emotional response. So I think you're both on the opposite sides of the fence there. So my next question would be, just have to go through my list here. Oh, it's on the length of time in the bylaw. When the bylaw refers to 72 hours, some of the research I've done and other people in the community have done who have contacted me, they recognize that if it's in the bylaw, then that's what it is. And even though I know that there are rules and regulations from the province regarding lengths of time, I'm worried that in the event that a bylaw officer chooses to strictly enforce the 72-hour that goes over a weekend, it won't be something unfortunate could happen from that instead of going 3 business days. So I'm wondering why we don't just change the time reference from 72 hours to 3 business days.
Through the chair, that question was asked and responded to previously. There is the Interpretation Act, which is very clear on that, where it talks about calculation of time, where it needs to be extended to the next business day. If there's a statutory holiday, I believe there are also implications, though, that Carly may be able to speak to about if it was changed to that permanently. So she might have a couple of comments on that.
Not necessarily specific to that wording change. I don't think that it would have much of an operational effect, changing from 72 hours to 3 business days. It's not something that comes up very often. To be honest, we have a very high claim rate in Nanaimo, and the vast majority of dogs are claimed within 24 hours. We would never say, oh, your impound period expired on Sunday when we were closed and therefore you can't claim your dog on Monday. That wouldn't ever happen. So operationally, I don't see a problem with that particular wording change, but I also don't have an issue with the 72 hours because we are reasonable and use discretion, and it isn't unheard of for people to ask for extensions if they are unable to claim their animal on a specific day. We're always happy to work with people as long as they make contact with us and show that they intend to claim their pet. They'll be given a reasonable time period.
Councillor Bonner, I would just add to that, I'm sorry you couldn't see me over here, just that all of our bylaws, for consistency purposes, we do rely on that language that does then refer to the Interpretation Act for the time and length. Like I know our Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy bylaw and the legislation, all of the BC legislation that our bylaws have to comply with all refer to that Interpretation Act, which does put the times and all of those exceptions, such as statutory holidays and business days versus weekends, and how Saturday is not a working day, and it's all spelled out in that Interpretation Act, and our language for that consistency purpose, we usually leave it that way. So that could be probably the reason it was written as it was.
So I guess that my question, and I would probably go to Carly, I guess, at this point. Does the officers that work on this have that training and know and also agree to that time frame?
It's actually myself and my coworker, the pound staff, that release the animals and work with the owners once they're impounded. It's not very common for an officer himself to release the animal. They're typically out on the road doing other things. So yes, all of us at Nanaimo Animal Control Services are on the same page about that.
I see. Okay, thank you. The next one was section 35, and someone brought this up to me. They're a dog trainer, and I think we know who they are. It refers to the amount of water that's available for a dog. And they specifically mentioned a particular type of breed that tends to bloat. And they were wondering if we couldn't add, unless prescribed by a vet, referring to not having water available to the dog at that in an enclosure.
Through the chair, could Allison respond to that one?
Yeah, so Karen and I have had many conversations about this, and essentially the downfall of bylaws is that you just can't make it for every situation. The whole point is that it is general, especially with these animal responsibility bylaws where each animal, each species, each breed is really different. This is when enforcement is really playing a significant role in these situations, because the whole point is not to penalize your average pet guardian, especially if you're following the medical advice of your veterinarian. So when there's no other concerns for the animal in a situation like that, say a complaint was lodged, but there's nothing in terms of licensing or other welfare or public safety, and the person is able to provide proof like, yes, this is what my veterinarian has prescribed for my animal, then there wouldn't be enforcement in that situation. But by allowing that kind of caveat to it, it would open it up for those who are not providing proper standards of care for their animals to kind of fly under the radar.
Thank you. And last one, if I may, section 84, we've chosen a 2-year period to allow for a appeal on an aggressive dog. Is that standard, or would 1 year work as well?
Through the chair, the 2 years is in line with what other jurisdictional bylaws who have that provision in. So where possible, it is always nice to mirror our neighbors, particularly when they're participating through our adjudication process. And the folks that have that provision all participate in the City of Nanaimo adjudication process. So it is nice just to have some consistency. Certainly if council wants to change it to 1 year, then that's council's call for sure.
Okay, thank you. I'm taking up everybody's time. My questions have been asked. Theme 6, you're looking for a final recommendation then, Ms. Robson, I'm guessing. Moved by...
That's correct.
Yeah, moved by His Worship Mayor, seconded by Councillor Hemmons. All those in favor, raise your hands. Any opposed, speak out. Hearing none, that's passed as well. Do we have a theme 7?
No, I just had a little next step slide to let everyone know what the procedure would be next. So these recommendations from today will be incorporated into the bylaw, and then they will be forwarded to council for consideration of first 3 readings. And then once the bylaw receives the first 3 readings, the bylaw will then be sent to the minister for approval, and when it comes back for adoption, staff will concurrently bring forward the associated fee and fine schedule bylaws, and the press release along with an FAQ sheet will be prepared. Other than that, I really appreciate council's time on this. I know it's been challenging, but I really do appreciate the time and support that you've shown for this.
Okay, thank you very much. I think next we're going to move on to update on active transportation plan. No, we're not.
Yeah, no, we are. Thank you, Chair. I was wondering if anybody needs a 5-minute break at all, or if everybody's okay.
Would everybody like to take a 5-minute break so we can come back and those who don't need to be here can fade out?
I'll say
All right, let's all come back at 3:25. How's that? Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Chair.
So I just told Shelley, you know the difference between a pit bull and a chihuahua humping your leg is, don't you?
of our meeting, and that is number 5.3. D3. And that's the update on the active transportation plan, and this is to be introduced by Mr. Sims, General Manager of Engineering and Public Works. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to be in front of the committee today. The presentation will be given by Maddie Coe, our first of all, active transportation specialist. So, as you know, the reimagined theme is consistent on the GPC agenda. You've received a number of presentations on our water supply strategic plan, on the economic development plan, and others. And in the next few weeks, you'll be continuing to hear more about the various plans that are underneath the overall umbrella. The other thing that's coming in the next few weeks is a wrap-up of our phase 1 engagements. We've been sort of getting regular updates, but the What We've Heard report will be coming before you shortly. So we're here today. Ms. Coe will present on some background around the active transportation plan, the work that's been ongoing so far, and a little sneak peek on some of what we've heard in that context. And really, as you're aware, the active transportation plan builds on the Nanaimo Transportation Master Plan of 2014 and provides some more granularity, especially when it comes to active transportation. You're very likely familiar with the principle that land use planning is transportation planning, is land use planning, is a whole bunch of other things, and that's really what staff have been framing the whole context around it. So it's really exciting to see how this integrated approach to all of these strategic documents are happening. It's really a cohesive whole that we're building towards. So I'll introduce Ms. Coe, and Mr. Rose is here for any technical questions as well, if the council has any of those. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks for the introduction. So I have to make sure I can figure out how to share my screen, first of all. Did that work?
Yes.
Excellent.
Will be even better if I expand it. Can you see that?
Yes.
So in past GPC meetings, you will have received updates on other Reimagine Nanaimo topics, and today we're pleased to give you an update on our active transportation planning as part of Reimagine. So I'm going to start the presentation with just a small recap on Reimagine and some of our active transportation planning directives. And then I'll talk about what we've done so far during phase 1, some of what we're learning, and then I'll talk about where we're going next in phase 2. So I chose this image for the first slide. This was a great submission we had for the Creative Community Contest by Sebastian Abode. And I just thought this really represents bringing all the pieces together in that collaborative and integrative approach that we've been taking with Reimagine. So we have these separate topics that we're looking at, but they all overlap so much. And throughout this process, we've been looking at them together, collaboratively and integrative between departments and across themes, because as we know, we can't look at any of these in isolation. Sustainability isn't its own topic, it's a topic that infiltrates into everything that we do, just like we can't look at transportation without also looking at land use. So this has really been foundational to Reimagine. It's just this integrative, collaborative approach, and that'll be the name of the game throughout this entire process. So with that being said, right up front, we are going to talk about a specific topic today, which is active transportation and how we move. This slide is showing kind of our big questions about active transportation with Reimagine Nanaimo, and this image that you see on your screen is taken out of our existing Nanaimo Transportation Master Plan from 2014. So these are the targets that the plan says we need to work towards for the year 2041. So it says we need to double our pedestrian trips, multiply cycling trips by 5, and multiply transit trips by 5. So the real question we've been trying to get at through Reimagine Nanaimo and the active transportation planning is how do we achieve
any of these targets. We know this is what we're going for, but how do we get there? What are the concrete activities, projects, initiatives that we need to undertake to get here? And then secondary to that is how do we prioritize those things? With Reimagine Nanaimo, so the Nanaimo Transportation Master Plan is for 2014. We're not quite at the point where we're ready to do a full overhaul of that, but it's perfect timing to be doing Reimagine Nanaimo to do kind of a midterm check on that plan at this point in time too. Even though active transportation is our focus, we do have the opportunity now to take a step back and look at how this plan has been serving us over the past 7 or so years, and if there's any tweaks that we can do, we do have the opportunity to do that through Reimagine. Was there any discussion or questions before I dive into what we've been doing so far?
I don't see any, and I would remind councillors that if they wish to ask a question, just to raise their hand, and Zinni, you can just butt in if you like. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'll move on then. So what have we done so far? So really the big part of phase 1 of Reimagine was community engagement, getting the word out that this process is happening and trying to hear from as many residents as possible. And this was a very collaborative process with other departments. And something very exciting coming up soon, which you'll be hearing about more at an upcoming GPC meeting, is we're expecting our full engagement summary from phase 1. Last I heard, I think that was going to be coming this week, so that's very exciting, and that'll give us a really clear picture of what the community had to say. Our engagement was carried out in a number of ways. You'll all be familiar with a lot of the online engagement opportunities, the questionnaires, the online activities, the creative community contest, pop-up stations that we did. But in addition to kind of that general public outreach, we also have done a lot of stakeholder engagement. So you'll see on your screen, here's a couple of examples. While we still could safely hold in-person meetings, we did a few of those with key stakeholders, but a lot of that took place over Zoom, as you can also see. So transportation staff participated in many of these sessions, so I'm just going to list off the different stakeholder groups that transportation was a part of. So we were involved with engaging accessibility groups, cyclists, trail users, skateboarders, environmental advocates, reconciliation advocates, neighborhood associations, moto car share, and electric vehicle users. So of that whole list, only the last two, so moto car share and electric vehicle users, those were the only ones that were specific to transportation, and the rest of those groups, we collaborated with other departments and other staff, and even some other jurisdictions in some cases to do that engagement. And it worked really well. It was just a great opportunity for us to kind of cross-pollinate, look at where there's areas for overlaps, and yeah, and I just wanted to point out that the group that we probably collaborated with the most was Parks and Recreation, just because we have a lot of overlaps. A lot of our user groups that are interested in cycling are also mountain bikers or trail users that like to get into the parks. So that was great. So for transportation, as I said, we all work together on organizing our different engagement events, and in the transportation department, we really focused our efforts on engaging on the topics of accessibility, inclusion, and equity. So what we did, the first one that we did was a transportation-focused session with Council's Committee on Accessibility and Inclusion. And in addition to that, we also did 2 focus groups over Zoom. So the first one that we did was, we co-hosted that with Spinal Cord Injury BC, and we had participation from 5 community members who used wheelchairs and other mobility devices. So that was a great hour-and-a-half discussion with them. And we also had another hour-and-a-half Zoom discussion with 3 community members who are blind or partially sighted. So those were just really informative. We had staff from the Regional District of Nanaimo involved with those actually, which was great because a lot of the issues that came up were related to transit. So that was perfect. We really appreciated having the RDN staff there, and the things that we learned are going to also help with some of the upcoming transit planning that's coming soon. And And yeah, the topic of accessibility and inclusion is going to be carried out throughout the Reimagine Nanaimo process, and it's definitely an example of something that is not specific to one topic. It is very infiltrated throughout everything we do. So those were kind of our more public-facing activities during phase 1, but in the background, behind the scenes, staff have also been working on a lot of background research. So this is kind of a funny slide, but I'll walk you through what these are. So starting at the top left, that is the front page of our first draft of a study that we've had done on our pedestrian prioritization review processes, which we haven't come up with a nicer name for that yet. But basically, we've hired a third party to look at how we deal with pedestrian crossing and network gap issues, so how we prioritize those and what factors we look at to make those decisions. So this is being done by comparing how Nanaimo does things, comparing that to other similar communities, and also looking at industry best practices to do with this. And the final report is coming very soon, and it's going to have a list of recommendations for how Nanaimo can tweak how we do things. So moving clockwise, so top middle, that is a screenshot showing Strava Metro dashboard. So this data is something that we can use to see kind of preferred active transportation routes through town. It's really cool. It's how it works is anyone that has the Strava app, and I'm not sure how many are familiar with that, I just got it, but it's kind of a recreation app where when people head out for, say, a bike ride or run, they would just press the GPS button on their app, do their run, and when they get home, they can share their route on social media and their friends cheer them on and that kind of thing. So how the big data part of that works is it compiles all of that information and puts it in a way that we can actually take the map, put an origin and a destination, plug that onto the map, and it will show us the preferred and second most preferred routes from an origin to a destination. So this is going to be something that will be really helpful as we're working on prioritizing our routes and our network build out. So to the right of that, we have a map. This is one of the population maps that we've had done for Reimagine Nanaimo. We have about 20 different maps. These are also still being worked on. Nothing's quite final yet, but these are really useful. So these show us things like where are different populations living in Nanaimo? Where are the concentration of seniors? What are the lower income areas? And then we also have maps that look similar to this showing us walkability radiuses. So where are the places that have longer distances to access a pharmacy, for example. So this is going to be really useful, especially when we start layering it on with things like Strava Metro and some of the other data that we're gathering. Below that, the cyclists there, we have a student from Carleton University working with us to produce bikeability maps for Nanaimo. So they have factors that they can use to determine how stressful cyclists will feel on any given road in Nanaimo. So the end result of that is we're going to have some pretty detailed mapping showing us what the perceived bikeability levels are throughout the city based on these factors that the student is using. So back to the middle at the bottom there, that is our community questionnaire. So this was the How We Move questionnaire for Reimagine Nanaimo. Kind of falls into the community engagement category, but there is some quantitative data that we'll be getting out of that as well. So I thought I'd put it on the background research slide. And then last but not least, in the bottom left, that is the streetlight dashboard. So this is some other data that we have purchased as a pilot project. It's fairly similar to Strava Metro in that it uses cell phone and car Bluetooth data, I believe, to track where people are actually moving throughout the city. So yeah, this is all things that are in the works, and they're getting close to completion, which is very exciting. Were there any questions or discussion at this point before I move on to what we've been learning?
I don't see any hands up, so I think we're okay to go. Wait a minute, I just thought I saw a hand up. Yes, Councillor Hammonds.
Thank you, Chair. A question for you too, Maddie. Would it be helpful if we encourage members of the community who are commuting to use the Strava app to fill out that data set?
That's a good question and one that we have pondered. I think on the one hand, I mean, it would help fill it out, but on the other hand, I think we would just have to be careful about looking like we're promoting a business, I believe, but I don't know if Jamie or Bill had anything else to add on that.
I'm just thinking, as a rider, I use Strava quite often, ride all over the city. How do you capture that data? How do I make sure that that data goes into our decision making? Is it something that I have to say that I share with you guys? Or do you just capture it as a collective piece of data?
I think there may be parameters people can set if they want to keep their rides private, and it may not go in, but I think otherwise, from what I understand, it just tabulates all of the data from all Strava users.
Okay, thank you.
Understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jamie and Bill.
I think Jamie wants to speak now. I don't know if she's going to correct you, but...
Nope, I'm just going to build on it. So, to the chair, to council comments. So, Strava is a third-party application, and so it is something that we can get some information from. There is an option when you're using it either for whatever activity you choose to flag commuting or to not. But the data we get is the anonymized, sterilized information that captures anybody using it, whatever their activity is, whether it's biking, walking, horseback riding, etc. So the one thing I think we would need to be aware of is if we draw people's attention to it, to be aware of that as the patterns change, because if we're going to try and calibrate it to some sort of a known value on the street, then if there's a sort of a bubble of or growth of interest, it could skew our information. So conversely, this is probably a better tool to really sort of see as a comparative as opposed to an absolute value. So hopefully that sheds some light on it.
Thank you for that. No further questions. I think we can carry on.
Okay, thank you. So what are we learning so far? And again, we are so close to getting our engagement summary, and that's really going to tell us about what we've heard. But I know that we're all probably curious to hear at least a few little sound bites that we've got from these stakeholder engagement sessions. So I put together this slide, and these are just a few little comments that we've received along the way. In no way is this statistically valid, but we've heard things like we need to have secure end-of-trip facilities for cyclists to encourage them to want to go to a destination and stay there longer, knowing that their bike will be safe. Safety for all ages and ability is paramount. We need to plan for a diverse and well-integrated transportation system that has a lot of diversity in modes and choices for people. Our budgets should prioritize funding sustainable transportation options. We need to address user conflicts when we're planning our new infrastructure, and gaps in the network should be addressed, and this is one we hear about a lot. And we actually received a most excellent creative community submission about this. We have a rap music video from two cyclists who are frustrated with finding their bike lanes, and so maybe we can show that at a subsequent GPC meeting. Integrate accessibility and inclusion into all facets of our work, so not just transportation, but everything. Active transportation is a key part of reaching our climate action targets, and being active outdoors improves mental and physical health. So those are just some standout points that we've heard, and we'll hear a lot more with our engagement summary. So some of the positive feedback that we've heard, so it's nice to reflect on this. So the first one that we wanted to just highlight is, so I mentioned that we're doing a third-party review of our pedestrian crossing and network gap processes and how we determine how to prioritize those. So preliminary results of that study have shown that the way that we do that actually measures up quite well in terms of, the factors that we look at and what infrastructure ends up on the ground at the end of it. So that part measures up pretty well when compared to other jurisdictions and best practices, so that's good. And where we have to improve is just on how we make those clearer to the public and people who are affected by it. Complete Streets were very well received. People are really excited about Metro Drive and just everything we have to look forward to with those standards now being in our MOESS. Then the third one here, so the piecemeal approach to the network gaps that we always hear about, while that is frustrating, there was also a lot of understanding from the community about why that's the approach that we use. And when we looked at it a little here, we can see that it actually is working. So this slide shows, so on the left here we have the short-term cycling network from the Nanaimo Transportation Master Plan. So this is what we want to see. And then on the right, we've got our current improved cycling corridors. I mean, we haven't quite got there yet, but you can see from the pink lines that even though it's piece by piece, we're slowly but surely building out this network. And yeah, a lot of the people who we spoke to were understanding that this is kind of a way that we've done it that seems to be working, even if those gaps can be frustrating. Were there any questions at this point before we move on to where we're going next?
I don't see any.
Okay, so where are we going next? So phase 2 is upon us, and a big part of phase 2 is going to start with our data analysis. So the engagement summary is a key piece of our data for phase 2, and we're going to be looking at that in combination with some of the spatial data. So those components that we were talking about, the Strava Metro, the demographic maps, and that kind of GIS analysis. And also, I just wanted to point out that all of this, again, is going to be done with a high degree of collaboration with other departments, because all of this information is extremely integrated and codependent. And I also just wanted to note, that the purpose of doing this is so that we can produce scenarios for Nanaimo's future. That's kind of the main goal for phase 2, is looking at options and looking at scenarios. And a key step is going to be a charrette session with council on that very topic, so evaluating scenarios, integrated scenarios for Nanaimo's future. We're also, as I mentioned briefly earlier, we're also in phase 2 going to take the opportunity to do a check-in on the Nanaimo Transportation Master Plan. How is it working? And are there any opportunities to tweak it at this point when we kind of take a closer look at our network in comparison to what we have established now? And another big question is prioritizing our investments, and I mentioned this one at the beginning as well. So we hear it every day, and we're hearing it through Reimagine, is that there's a lot of demand for new active transportation infrastructure, and we know that we can't deliver it all overnight, so we have to ask ourselves, how do we prioritize all of this to ensure we're doing everything we need to do and in the right order? So to kind of break that down, I thought I would use this old cliche, but so starting with why are we doing our projects? This should always link back to our high-level plans and the vision in Reimagine Nanaimo and our other plans. For the how, we have to ask the question of what processes and procedures will guide our work, and how will we make this as transparent as possible. Where in the city should we be prioritizing our investments? Are there areas that we should be looking at above others for a range of reasons? So what are we actually putting on the ground? Are we always trying to go for the biggest and best or standards, or are there times when we can consider something that may still achieve the desired outcome but for less budget? Who are the users that we're trying to affect here? Are there users that require additional levels of service that we should be providing for? And when? So determining our short, medium, and long-term priorities and timeframes. So breaking down these questions, this is going to require further input from the community and guidance from council. So just big questions for us to wrap our minds around during phase 2. And the results from phase 1 will begin to answer some of these questions, but we'll definitely need to look at them more closely. And so this is my last slide. This is just kind of some food for thought as we go ahead. On the top left, we have a rendering of Metro Drive demonstrating out of our most shiny and highest standard that we can go for, while on the bottom left we have the bollards that were installed on 7th Street as kind of an interim measure, and this just demonstrates kind of the range of options that we have at our fingertips to consider when looking at improvements. And then on the right side, this is just a reminder for us that it doesn't all have to be about infrastructure. There's also a big role to play with education, getting people out, using what we already have and learning how to do that safely. So that was all I had. Thank you so much for listening, and really looking forward to diving into phase 2.
Thank you, and I think we have a question from Councillor Brown.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Maddie, for the presentation and your work on this, and everybody that's doing work on this. You talked about sort of the integration and then with the other plans, but also the goals in the Transportation Master Plan. I'm just wondering, in particular, with the Community Sustainability Action Plan and those goals being updated, and we had a report a while back that clearly shows that transportation and building efficiencies are the 2 biggest drivers of our GHG emissions. Will some of the goals, how will that information sort of influence the goals in this plan or the overarching Transportation Master Plan? I'm just thinking of the where do we go next question.
Through the chair, yeah, I think that's going to be a big question in phase 2, is just making sure that whatever that plan is saying we need to achieve, that our policies and our targets are integrated with that, and so they match. And I don't think we have an exact roadmap yet of how we'll do that, but that's definitely a key part of phase 2, is looking at how we make sure that all of these plans align and support each of them to meet each of their objectives. And a lot of them I can see also being, rather than individual plans, that they will be kind of integrated into the same plan, Reimagine and IMO. But yeah, I don't know exactly how that will look at the end of the day, but for sure that's a big question for us to tackle.
Cool, thank you.
Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Chair Bonner. I just want to extend my thanks. What was presented today is a timely reminder that notwithstanding that the public doesn't always see or appreciate, and sometimes even council doesn't always see and appreciate, behind the scenes, the good people of Nanaimo are well served by all of you who continue to do the work and carry on day after day, and this kind of presentation is just the kind of thing that I hope the public will watch and will see more of. And I just want to express my thanks on behalf of the city.
Thank you. And Councillor Gaspar.
Thanks, Chair. Through Ms. Coe, I was just wondering, just building on Councillor Brown's question, just in terms of the targets set in the active transportation plan, will there be a set of a new, are we revising what our targets will be in terms of mode shift? And the targets that you showed earlier in the slide, were those targets that were selected were developed in the Transportation Master Plan earlier? And are those going to be revised and with a new set of targets?
Thank you, through the chair. Yes, those targets were developed with the 2014 plan, and that's the plan that we're working with today. So that's kind of the context that we have. We're not looking to overhaul the plan at this point in time. We do have the opportunity to tweak it if we need to. It's a great opportunity to take a step back and see if those are working, or maybe they do need to be altered slightly if we have findings from the climate action planning results. If that reveals that we need to be more aggressive or rejig those somehow, then yeah, we would have the opportunity to look at that through this and phase 2, with all the analysis of these scenarios and looking at everything together, should really give us a clear picture of what will be needed.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think, with the updating of all these plans and the chance to integrate them and really take a step back and take a big picture, I think that if taking the time to reevaluate and our targets and set ones that make sense for the conditions now and what we need to accomplish is an important opportunity to take. So, thank you.
Thank you for that. Mr. Rose, your hand's up, or was up.
Through the chair, I think I just wanted to add a couple of sentiments, I guess. I think that in general, the goals that are outlined in the Transportation Master Plan, we need to be aware if we want to revisit those in the context of we've been on that plan for 7 years and we're actually not at a point of knowing how successful our strategy has been yet. We're trying to extract that through this process. So knowing that we're going to be updating our Transportation Master Plan in 3 years' time, 4 years' time, I think we're looking at this more in the context of how can we adjust our strategies to better succeed in getting to those goals, and then in 3 or 4 years' time, then we'll be able to revisit the goals themselves and see whether or not we're actually succeeding in them.
Thank you for that. And Councillor Brown, your hand's still up. You wish to add something more?
It was an accident, but no, I will comment. I think that's probably a really effective approach. I looked at what Vancouver did in terms of how they're achieving some of their climate goals, and really what they did was they went back to their plans and said, okay, without real overhauling all of them, how do we accelerate them to meet, the goal is still good, even if we fell short, we need to accelerate the actual strategies to get there. So I think that thanks Mr. Rose for comments. I think it's a wise approach.
Thank you for that. I don't see any other hands up. Question is on phase 2. When do we expect that to be wrapped up? And then I guess, what will we be seeing at the end of it?
I can try that one. And I apologize, I don't know exactly the timeline that we're working with for that. There was a few delays and I haven't seen an updated schedule since that happened. But I believe that will all be brought to the GPC very soon, along with the engagement summary. I know that our consultants are working on a work plan for phase 2 right now, so that will have quite a bit more detail about what's happening when. And then what was going to be the result of phase 2. So the big goal for phase 2 is that at the end of that, we will have scenarios for Nanaimo's future. So looking at all of the different topics and how we would like to see Nanaimo develop, the various scenarios for how we can grow. And yeah, that's the gist of it. And I'm sure that the next presentation that you get will probably shine a lot more light on that.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, I'll thank you as just for information, I'm guessing. Thanks very much for that. I appreciate all the work you've done on this. I think we're now going to move on to, we don't have any under item E, which is Reimagine Nanaimo, although that was on it.
Yes.
And we have F, which is agenda planning.
Thank you, Chair. So in light of the time, I just have a couple things that I wanted to speak about for the agenda planning process. The last page of your agenda, page 112, shows the upcoming GPC and special council meeting or special council meeting topics. So for January 25th, you had Reimagine Nanaimo, which, as council knows, as the steering committee for Reimagine Nanaimo, this will be a standing item on every GPC meeting, as the committee is the steering committee for Reimagine. So every GPC meeting, you'll have something to do with Reimagine. But for the 25th, it has Reimagine, a public hearing process policy, and the strategic plan update. However, council has a training session planned for that day, and nothing meeting is on your GPC for the 8th. So in lieu of the GPC on the 25th, those items will actually be under the February 8th GPC meeting, and you will be having a training session that you'll be invited to for January 25th that I believe council is already aware of. And then for February 22nd, staff are hopeful and task forces are hopeful to have the Health and Housing Task Force final report and the Economic Development Task Force final report and/or a status. As well, we were going to look at some prioritizing today, but again, because of the time and because of the alignment with the strategic plan that is now scheduled for February 8th, some staff have some items that are on your list on page 110 of your agenda, ready to go in the near future, such as the community amenity contribution policy, which is number 5 on that list, and the building permit review. That review is underway, and results of that review should be presented to you in about a month's time. So some things are dependent on when they're complete, and staff can bring them to you. But as for the rest of those on the list and those priorities, perhaps the next GPC on February 8th, you would gain a better understanding or a better idea of what your priorities might be when the strategic plan is updated as well. So just my thoughts, and I put it back to council to let me know what you'd like to do.
Do we have anybody that would like to tell her what we'd like to do? I think they're all fine with that.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thumbs up, excellent.
So that's it then.
All right, we don't need any motions other than, you're not going to throw any motions on us, no?
Adjournment.
Go, motion to adjourn. Thank you very much, Mayor. Seconded by Councilor Martman. All those in favor, raise your hands. Any opposed? Say, speak out. Hearing none. Good. See you all, folks, and next Monday. Okay. Thanks so much.